I don't take myself too seriously, but I take this job very seriously. If I can nudge things, even a little, towards economic empowerment, intergenerational fairness, and a fair reward for effort, then maybe watching all that weird parliamentary TV as a kid was worth it after all. Thank you.
Just give senators a moment and I'll call the clerk.
Business of the Senate, order of the day, resumption of debate on a motion moved by Senator Bragg to disallow the tax assessment bill to rent developments determination 2024.
Senator Roberts, you're seeking the call.
Thank you, Deputy President. Senator Bragg's disallowance seeks to throw a spanner in the works of the build-to-rent scheme. That's a very good thing, and One Nation will be wholeheartedly supporting. Foreign corporations used to pay a 30% withholding tax on housing investments like build-to-rent. Labor cut that in half to 15%. Let's be clear. This Labor government said to foreign corporate landlords like BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, First State, Labor said to them that we'll cut the amount of tax you pay in half. Forget the Australian dream of owning your own home. Labor's dream is that you'll live in a stack and pack shoebox apartment paying rent to BlackRock forever, while those foreign corporations pay less tax than you do. That's what build to rent means. Whenever you hear build to rent, remember renting forever to a foreign corporation, a foreign corporate landlord, a foreign global wealth investment fund. They'll build homes for sure, and Australians will never, ever own them. Never. It's built to rent forever. From the committee report into the Treasury Laws Amendment, Bill to Rent Bill 2024, and Capital Works Bill to Rent Misuse Tax Bill 2024, from the provisions. The bill provisions would include reducing the final withholding tax rate on eligible fund payments, distributions of rental income and capital gains from eligible managed investment trusts, trust investments, from 30% to 15%, starting from the 1st of July 2024. So there you go, a tax cut in half for those global corporate predatory investments, investors who own almost everything and are determined to own everything. I'll say that again. Who own almost everything and are determined to own everything. Next, the draft legislation was adjusted as a result of this consultation to ensure the government's policy objective of incentivising foreign investment in BTR, built to rent, including affordable housing supply, is achieved. Objective of incentivising foreign investment in build to rent. Foreign investment. They are admitting that the objective of the bill is incentivising foreign and predatory corporations into owning your home. The Property Council advised the 15% tax rate for investment in housing is already available to Australian investors. The Managed Investment Trust withholding tax rate applies to withholding tax that goes back to overseas predators, parasites, investors. Yet foreign investors can also capital partner with Australian investors. That is the most telling part of all. This bill only changed the tax treatment of foreign, predatory, multinational corporations. That's all. Nothing for Australians. Australian companies could do it. Foreign companies paid a penalty. That's a good thing. Yet the Labor Party of Australia changed that. You and the government changed that. Is Labor the party for Australia? Or are they the party for global foreign corporations? Build to rent answers that question clearly. Clearly they are for the foreign corporations like BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, First State. One Nation, though, is for Australians owning their own home. I'm going to do something a little unusual and quote extensively Senator Bragg's dissenting report on the Build to Rent bill, an outstanding report. I hope you don't mind, Senator Bragg. It goes to the very heart of what's wrong with the new Labor Party. Firstly, Build to Rent has had minimal cut-through in Australia because our tax settings are designed to favour individual mum and dad investors, not institutions. That's appropriate. This legislation seeks to tip the scales in favour of institutions through tax concessions in order to make Build to Rent projects profitable for industry super funds and foreign fund managers. Labor thinks that institutions need a leg up over Australian first-home buyers. Why? Dr Murray was critical of the bill's attempted perversion of our tax arrangements. Quote, "It's not clear to me why local investors shouldn't be advantaged over foreign investors in Australian housing. I don't see that there's a good argument for levelling the playing field there. It's not clear to me. If the intention is to attract super funds into this, why owning your own home via your super fund and renting your own home from your super fund is better than owning your own home and using that money to buy what is the best asset to own in retirement. Just like One Nation policy." At the public hearing, the Association of Superannuation Funds of Australia, ASFA, suggested that Australians would prefer BlackRock and CBUS to be the nation's landlords. Really? You would? And describe mum and dad investors as undertaking a hobby activity. How condescending, how arrogant. Do you think the Australian people want to rent their house from a super fund? Mr Clare says, I think that they would be very happy with institutionally owned residential property where there is an option of having longer-term tenancies rather than the more typical in-the-market situation where there is a lack of assurance of continuity of tenancy because it's a small-scale hobby activity for individual landlords. This is the view of a vested interest. Most Australians would not agree with this proposal. Other witnesses did not share ASFA's view. Grounded Community Land Trust Advocacy told the committee, "Are you concerned that we are seeing a corporatisation of housing in Australia?" Mr Fitzgerald, quote, "Absolutely. This is delivering horrifying results in the Northern Hemisphere, and this legislation makes no account of that, no account of what's actually happening. It perplexes me that this government, which purports to be in support of Labor, that's workers, is allowing rent maximisation strategies to come through unabated." Yes, he went on to say, "I agree. Pushing mum and dad investors out of the housing market will result in less competition, an oligopoly for the big fellas. What we're seeing in the Northern Hemisphere is a horrific new software program called YieldStar, which in Atlanta coordinates rental increases of 81% for 81% of rental properties. The Board of Supervisors in San Francisco has now banned this as a monopolistic practice. Yet you want to bring it in. There's just nothing in this legislation that even prepares us for what's coming. Nothing in this legislation that even prepares us for what is coming." End of quote from Mr Fitzgerald. The Housing Industry Association pointed to the importance of Australia's housing market maintaining a focus on individual ownership. But isn't it the case that the character of the housing market in Australia is largely focused on individuals? Do you think that's a good or a bad design feature? Mr Reardon said, quote, in answer, "I think that is a very positive outcome with the association and connection with home and with location and a sense of place and purpose, all of those dynamics, reinforcing what we already know and what Senator Bragg has already discussed. All the evidence," he goes on, "shows that people who own their own home are far less likely to be incarcerated and more likely to be gainfully employed. All of the evidence shows positive economic, social and cultural outcomes. Personal responsibility, a cornerstone, a foundation of a safe and productive society. Personal responsibility enables and is the basis for a safe and productive society. Australians," next quote from Senator Bragg's report, "Australians are not interested in subsidising institutional investors. When asked what organisations would be the key beneficiaries of build-to-rent tax concessions, Treasury confirmed that foreign fund managers would be at the centre." Treasury confirmed. Quote, "There are a lot of foreign investors using the managed investment trust because of the withholding tax concessions and other benefits from using that structure. But there can also be domestic investors using the managed investment trust. They just get a different tax regime. Those investors will be working in partnership with commercial developers to develop these buildings." End of quote. CBA Super has previously committed to scaling up in the build-to-rent sector, announcing a plan to scale up its portfolio to approximately $2 billion in apartments. Some of the most alarming evidence from the public hearing was that the passing of this bill could see Australian taxpayers subsidising foreign governments in their investment in their housing market. Australian taxpayers could be subsidising foreign governments in their investment in our housing market. Dr Murray, again, he warned, quote, "I find it interesting because we've already got foreign investment funds doing build-to-rent. That's what's even funnier is that the largest one is a foreign government. We've got the Abu Dhabi Investment Council, who owns the Smith Collective on the Gold Coast, which is 1,251 build-to-rent dwellings, and we're now proposing to offer them a better tax treatment for something they're already doing through a foreign government. I find that a bizarre outcome of this proposed bill. It is bizarre." End of quote. "Approaches like build-to-rent endeavour to emulate the corporate housing model, which has seen a downturn in the United States housing market. Fund managers have become the predominant landlords in the United States." And I'll digress from Senator Bragg's dissenting report for a minute. The bankers in the United States said in the 1920s that their dream is through a combination of predatory behaviour and legislation to get a monopoly and own every house that they can. in the country, to control people. Because once people have their residence at stake, then they are easily controlled. Fund managers have become the predominant landlords in the US. According to the US Government General Accounting Office, large institutional investors emerged following the global financial crisis, purchasing foreclosed homes at auction in bulk and converting them into rental housing. In 2023, corporate housing funds held $1 trillion US in assets. In Atlanta, Charlotte and Jacksonville, institutional investors own 25%, 18% and 21% of the rental stock, respectively. That's what you're wanting here. We don't want it. This corporate housing model, in order to generate a return on investment for institutional investors, relies on individuals being locked into a cycle of perpetual renting. Locked in. Exactly what we've been warning for the last 5 years. There is a growing consensus in the United States that this model has failed and is hurting prospective first-home buyers. Lawmakers from both sides of politics are now introducing legislation to limit institutional investment accordingly. What's happening? This has failed. While the United States is moving away from corporate housing, the Australian Labor Party is forcing Australians into it. Well, Senator Bragg, I'm not ashamed to admit we probably couldn't have written it better ourselves. Thank you. Build to rent is an abomination that destroys the Australian dream of owning your own home. One nation raised this cruel reality years ago. One nation rejects making Australians forever renters to a cartel of greedy foreign corporations. Let's see if you repeat that. One nation rejects making Australians forever renters to a cartel of greedy foreign corporations, predatory, parasitic corporations. Parasitic predators driving the World Economic Forum and United Nations agenda. On your conscience. All Australians should be able to work hard and one day own their own slice of this great, big, wonderful country with so much potential. Only one nation has the policy to make this real for everyday Australians.
Order. Senator Whittaker.
Thank you, Deputy President. I rise to speak in opposition of this motion from Senator Bragg, because what we have here is just yet another housing stunt from Senator Bragg that attempts to deny everyday Australians the right to safe and affordable housing. This is the second time in as many months we've had to come in here and remind those opposite of some basic truths about housing in Australia. Last month, Senator Bragg told us that the Australian dream of home ownership is slipping away. This week, he's called our policies on housing crazy ideas and has vowed to stand in the way of real progress to tackle the housing challenges we're seeing across the country. And now, with this disallowance, he wants to raise taxes on builders and rip away incentives that are unlocking tens of thousands of new rental homes. The Liberals have no credibility on housing. The Liberals are housing hypocrites, and Australians can see right through it. They know the facts. Under the Liberals, housing affordability went backwards. They slashed investment, left supply entirely to the market and did nothing meaningful for renters. They did not build homes. They didn't even have a housing minister at the cabinet table. And since they were booted out of government by the Australian people in 2022, they have done nothing but stand in the way of meaningful action to get more people into homes. They have opposed the Housing Australia Future Fund. They've argued to scrap our housing target, and now they're trying to stand in the way of our build-to-rent scheme. Instead of working constructively with us to tackle this issue, instead they stand in the way. The matter before us today relates to legislation passed last year to boost build-to-rent housing. New rentals with 5-year leases and no-fault evictions. Ultimately, it's about increasing rental supply and giving tenants more certainty. Independent experts have said it strikes the right balance, and industry estimates show it will support 80,000 new homes across the country. Let me say that again, 80,000 new homes for renters. Are these guys serious? They propose to stand in the way of 80,000 homes for Australians, to stand in the way of affordable rental housing for Australians who need it. It's really no wonder that the coalition went backwards at the election in May. Senator Bragg claims our build-to-rent reforms are a foreign investor tax cut, promote the Australian nightmare of lifelong renting. That's pure fear-mongering. We know that in order to tackle this housing challenge, we have to pull every lever. We must do everything we can. Build to rent doesn't stop anyone buying a home. It builds new rental supply, which we desperately need. And after a decade of Liberal neglect on housing, threatening to rip away the incentives to drive 80,000 rental homes is the real nightmare. To qualify for these tax settings, developments must meet strict conditions. At least 50 dwellings under single ownership for 15 years, minimum 5-year leases as the default, at least 10% of dwellings offered at affordable rental rates capped below market, stronger renter protections, and including bans on no-fault evictions. It's targeted policy to deliver long-term rental supply and stability. And this is just one part of Labor's $43 billion Homes for Australia plan, because we know to tackle the housing crisis, a crisis that's come from a decade of neglect from those opposite, takes work from every angle. And that's just what we're doing. Building more homes, getting more people into their first homes, getting more people into affordable homes, making renting more affordable, making renting fairer. The most comprehensive housing agenda in a generation. We are investing at every stage. Just yesterday, the Prime Minister announced we will bring forward our plan to deliver 5% first home buyers' deposits to the 1st of October. We're delivering the biggest boost to rental assistance in 3 decades, building 55,000 social and affordable homes and record investment in crisis accommodation, setting an ambitious target of 1.2 million new, well-located homes in 5 years, training more tradies in construction and attracting more of them too with our $10,000 incentive payment. We're streamlining planning, cutting red tape, and we're supporting modern methods like prefab construction to speed up builds where we can. All of this is about one thing: more homes for Australians. Easier to buy, easier to rent, easier to build more homes. Because finding an affordable place to live should not be a struggle. Whether you're a renter, whether you're a homeowner, we are standing with you to make housing more available and more affordable. Senator Bragg has brought 2 motions on housing to this chamber in 2 months. He spends a lot of time talking about our housing agenda, but not once has Senator Bragg put forward a credible plan to build a single home. And his colleagues are much the same. All we get is negativity and obstruction. But Australians deserve better than that. Australians who are renting or looking to rent deserve better than that. Australians who want to buy their first home deserve better than that. Better than the negativity that we're seeing from those opposite. Only Labor has the plan, the commitment and the determination to deliver more homes, and that is why I urge the chamber to defeat this motion.
Senator Ananda Raja.
Thank you, Deputy President. Deputy President, the Liberals and Nationals say that they want more homes, but they keep standing in the way. And they have form. I was here in the first term of government in the other place, and I recall distinctly how the Liberals, Nationals and the Greens political party paired up and delayed the Housing Australia Future Fund. They delayed that fund, $10 billion, to build social and affordable homes. They delayed it for a year. Now, Senator Bragg stood up here in this chamber and said that it's been operating for 2 years. It hasn't built a single home. In fact, the Housing Australia Future Fund went live in September 24. September 24. That was the first round of funding. It has had 2 rounds of funding, and right now there are 28,000 homes that are either in planning or in construction. Not just due to that, but due to other measures as well. The second important housing program that they delayed, in the same sort of strategy, they palled up with their new best buddies, the Greens political party, was the Help to Buy scheme. Help to Buy. Help to Buy was kicked, that can was kicked down the road. And I remember it distinctly because I told my entire electorate about it, and they weren't happy. So you are gifting me another one. Thank you, because I will be telling everyone in Victoria about this little stunt. You kicked that can down the road. Help to Buy was designed for the people really at the bottom of the pile, people with the most modest incomes, cleaners, people who have never ever dreamt of having a home over their heads. And Help to Buy was designed for them. And the Liberals, the Nationals and the Greens took it upon themselves to delay that scheme. Help to Buy enables homeowners to enter the market with as little as a 2% deposit, with the government stumping up 30 to 40% of the equity. So you need a very low deposit as well as very low mortgage repayments. Now, we're getting the states to sign on to Help to Buy, and that will also go live, providing another plank in our housing program. But that's not all. Build to Rent is a really important pillar in our housing program. Build to Rent, for those who aren't sure about it, has actually been operating in the UK for the last 13 years. It is well established in the UK. And the UK has around 300,000 build-to-rent properties, either in construction or already built. Well established. And yes, they are supported by the likes of pension funds. Now, given the scale of the problem that we are facing in Australia, which is essentially market failure staring us in the face, we have to pull multiple levers. This is a complex problem. And with complex problems, just like in medicine, you've got to tackle them on multiple fronts. You don't do one thing, you do everything. So Build to Rent is a welcome tool in our armamentarium. And it means that we deepen our access to capital markets. Increasingly, building property needs a mix of domestic capital as well as offshore capital. And that offshore capital may come in the form of pension funds from overseas or sovereign wealth funds. And if they want to build homes for Australians, great. We welcome it. And that was the whole point of this. Often that capital is mixing with capital domestically as well to build these homes. 80,000 homes is what is estimated will be built over the next 5 to 10 years by the Property Council, of which 10% will be ring-fenced for social affordable. These properties will have 5-year tenure and no fault evictions. Again, speaking to the work we have done with the states in protecting and improving renters' rights. It does mean that Australians now will have options. So just like on the 1st of October, those who want to enter the housing market will now have an opportunity as we launch an expanded version of the Housing Guarantee Scheme. We will now have an opportunity for those people who wish to rent for longer to do so. But there's a presumption in this chamber that build to rent stops there, that it's lifelong renting. That's not the case. People often start renting at some point in their life and they may transition out into home ownership. And we're creating those pathways for them through the Home Guarantee Scheme by expanding that. But there are also newer products that are emerging in Australia. It's not just build to rent anymore. Speaking to the super funds here in Australia, I know that there is now a new product, build to rent to buy, which actually enables people to first enter into a build to rent model and then subsequently have the option to purchase that apartment or unit, whatever the case may be. So you can see by creating an ecosystem of a variety of different products out there that the market starts to shift and change to meet the needs of the consumer. And that's what we're trying to facilitate as a government. We're not trying to dictate, we're trying to provide Australians, particularly young Australians, a choice so that if they want to enter the housing market, they can put their hand up, line up their ducks, go and see the bank, get their finances in order, and delve into home ownership. The 1st of October, Home Guarantee Scheme will open up to all first home buyers. It will not be means tested. We have removed the income caps. There will be caps on property. So for example, in Victoria, in Melbourne and Geelong, properties will be capped at around 950,000. If everywhere else in Victoria, it'll be around 650,000. It's hardly the case that the children of billionaires, as Senator Bragg asserts, will be purchasing these properties. What a over-exaggeration, complete hyperbole. We are also interested in accelerating the building process by slashing red tape. And we're doing that by taking the National Construction Code, for example, pausing it for a period of 4 to 5 years and simplifying it in that interim period, because we've heard feedback from the construction industry. And I'll take that contribution. It was a suggestion by the coalition, but we're improving upon that, which is worth doing. And I'll also note that the Home Guarantee Scheme was a coalition legacy. And what we did in our first term of government was actually expand eligibility of that scheme. And what we found, and tune it up, and what we found was that it was wildly successful. Over 100,000 households took up the modifications that we made. And so we have now gone further. We have gone further by opening it up further to first home buyers, irrespective of their income. And that has been that has garnered so much interest that the website crashed yesterday. The website crashed, Deputy President. So, Deputy President, I think it is genuinely perplexing given the scale of the problem, and we see it every day in our streets in Australia. We see it on the footpaths, people sleeping on our footpaths, even in wealthy electorates like mine was in Higgins. There it was. I also knew that families were living in cars in council car parks in Higgins, one of the wealthiest electorates in Australia. So if it's bad there, imagine what it's like elsewhere. We have not just people living in tents, but we now have people living in tent cities. There are around 122,000 Australians who are homeless every night, based on data from 4 years ago, a census. We think that number is much worse now. Back then, around 8,000 people slept rough, including around 200 children under the age of 12. Those numbers may well be worse now. This is an emergency. Start treating it like an emergency, the Liberals and Nationals, and stop blocking our housing agenda. This is an emergency. You don't do one thing, you do everything. And at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is the outcome. And the outcome is more homes for Australia, more homes for Australians. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Kovacic.
Deputy President, well, I'm going to change the start of my speech because I won't be lectured to here in this chamber by a party that has facilitated the worst housing crisis our country has ever seen, and to lecture us on what we should and could do when you have stood by and allowed this to occur. For the best part of 20 years, I assisted young people and everyday Australians to purchase their own homes, and not once did anybody walk up to me or sit down with me and desperately say, I want to be a forever renter. They came to me and said, can you please help me buy a home? That's right. Can you please help me find a way to have a roof over the head of my family that belongs to us? The problem with the build-to-rent scheme is that it focuses too much on build-to-rent. If this government focuses far too much on build-to-rent as a solution. A number of times today in this chamber, in different speeches, I have heard people from the other side say that build-to-rent is a supply-side solution. Build-to-rent is not a supply-side solution for people who need to buy their own homes. It is a solution for people who need to rent, but it is not a solution for people who wish to buy. It is in no way a supply-side solution to the 5% deposit scheme. They are not connected. The 5% deposit scheme, as Senator Henderson correctly stated, which was a coalition policy and a coalition measure in a previous government, is something that you require supply-side mechanisms for. On October the 1st, this will be opened up to everybody, and guess what? We don't have the houses for the people to buy. So, newsflash, that's not helping anybody. What it will do is artificially increase prices because the supply-side mechanisms have not been put into place. That is the reality of what we're dealing with here. This disallowance motion from Senator Bragg intends to stop the government handing out a tax cut to foreign investors, which promotes renting rather than home ownership. The Coalition is not against foreign investors. The Coalition is not against business making money. What we are against is the falsehood that build-to-rent is somehow a fair and reasonable alternative to people owning their own home. It is not. We want Australians to own their own homes. This government wants super funds to own those homes and for Australians to rent those homes. And that is what we have a problem with. Somebody actually made a comment to me today about master-planned communities and you know, how important they are in the construction sector. And it made me realise this is actually a master-planned rental cycle from the government. The super funds will own the homes, the CFMEU will build the homes, and then Australians will rent the homes. Well, we're here to tell you that we're not okay with that. We absolutely want to see fair and reasonable rentals available to Australians that want to rent or need to rent. But we must make sure that there is adequate housing stock, adequate supply, and proper focus from this government to ensure that people that want to buy their own home can. Not the unfair scenario of providing a scheme of 5% deposit with no additional supply, no additional houses for young people to buy them. I mean, how disheartening is that? Yeah, thank you for that. What am I going to buy? Where is it? Where are the houses? The HAF has built 17 houses. 17 houses. That is extraordinary. Supercharging foreign institutional investment and ownership of Australia's housing stock in a perpetual rent forever cycle is absolutely not acceptable. And while build-to-rent absolutely can be part of the mix, it should not require a tax cut, a tax concession. for foreign investors to own the homes that Australians live in. That is unacceptable. While we support foreign investment, as I said earlier, it must fit within the culture of fairness, and that doesn't meet the pub test. That's just not on. This government has got their priorities completely confused. They should be focusing on people, on Australians, young Australians. We've heard today a great deal about intergenerational fairness. Well, that would be to facilitate young people to buy their own homes, not to give potential handouts to foreign investors to own those homes that young Australians will rent. That is not okay. The construction code is another significant issue that feeds into the problem of housing in this country. A document that's almost some 2,000 pages long that is nothing but obstructive in terms of facilitating greater supply. We articulated that before the last election. We took that as a policy to the last election. And what did this government do? This government said that we were bad, that it was dangerous, that we wanted dodgy housing, that we wanted Australians to live in dodgy housing. Another falsehood, completely untrue. And what has happened now? Now they've adopted the same policy. Now they've changed it a little bit, tinkered around the edges, but it's pretty similar. And now the narrative is not that it's bad or promoting dodgy housing. Now the narrative is when we see good ideas, we'll acknowledge it. Well, there you go. I'll leave you to think about that. I think probably the thing that bothers me the most about this whole scenario is the suggestion that we on this side are blocking the supply of housing. We've done nothing but fight for fairness for young Australians and everyday Australians to own their own homes. We talk about that constantly. I've talked about it for a long time. Senator Bragg raises it very regularly as well, as, you know, there's been some mirth about that from the other side. But we talk about this because we hear about this all the time. People talk to us about this every day. And we are totally cognizant of the fact that there is a housing crisis in this country. But we need this government to do something that facilitates the supply of housing so that people who wish to own their own homes can buy their own homes. And the thing that I'm going to finish on, and I've said it many times and I'm going to say it again, I have a massive problem with the fact that this government thinks it's okay for a super fund to own my own home, but I am not able to access my own super, my own money, to purchase that home. That is entirely unfair. That is entirely unreasonable. Today there was a mention in one of the speeches around homelessness and the prevalence of homelessness. The largest growing cohort of homeless in this country is women over the age of 55. A woman over 55 can access her super under special provisions as an emergency to pay rent to somebody. But she can't access it to buy her own home. You explain that to me and tell me that you are focused on Australians owning their own home. Thank you, Deputy President.
Senator Scarr.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President, and it's a real delight to follow the remarks of my colleague. There was a lot of common sense and wisdom in that presentation. I've got here the State of the Housing System 2025 report from the National Housing Supply and Affordability Council. If you were to listen to those opposite, they would say to you that all the issues in relation to housing supply occurred under the previous government, but this actually tells the truth. This tells the truth. This is the government's own agency. The government's own agency giving its report with respect to what's the reality in terms of housing supply. And I want to quote a number of the key findings in this report. I quote from page 1 of the report. Quote, "The supply of new housing is near its lowest level in a decade. 177,000 dwellings were completed in 2024, falling significantly short of underlying demand for housing, which was estimated at around 223,000 for the same period." So this is under Labor. This is under Labor. Record lows through the decade, over the decade, in relation to new housing construction. Quote, "This shortfall added to already significant unmet demand in the system," end quote. And then I quote further from the first page. 938,000 dwellings are forecast to be completed during the Housing Accord period, which falls short of the 1.2 million target. Scenario analysis indicates that even under optimistic economic scenarios, the target will not be achieved. Will not be achieved, even under the most optimistic scenarios. I continue. No state or territory is forecast to meet the share of the target implied by its population. So you're not going to meet the target on a national level, and no state or territory is going to meet the target of its share of the 1.2 million target. I continue. When factoring in demolitions, the net new supply is expected to total 825,000 over the Housing Accord period, which is 79,000 dwellings fewer than expected new underlying demand, end quote. And then I go to page 5. Quote, "Over the Housing Accord period that commenced on 1 July 2024, under Labor, the Council forecasts that gross new housing supply will be 938,000 under baseline macroeconomic conditions and current policy settings, or around 188,000 per year on average. This implies a shortfall of 262,000 relative to the 1.2 million Housing Accord target, which is a little more than 256,900 shortfall forecast in State of the Housing System 2024. So 2024 to 2025, the shortfall actually went up. That's what the independent analysis is telling us. And then if senators representing various states and territories want to look at the position in their own state or territory, they can do so at a table on page 7. And this indicates the following in terms of gross new housing supply and its ratio to share of target. New South Wales, 65%. So the government's own agency is saying that New South Wales will only meet 65% of its share of the new housing target. Victoria doing much better, 98%. My home state of Queensland, 79%. Western Australia, 81%. South Australia, 71%. Tasmania, 51%. ACT, 78%. Northern Territory at an extraordinarily low 31%. The report goes on, after accounting for the expected demolition of around 113,000 dwellings, net new housing supply is projected to be 825,000 over the Housing Accord period, or just over 165,000 dwellings per year on average. In comparison, new underlying housing demand is forecast to be 904,000. 825,000 compared to housing demand of 904,000. Houston, we have a problem. We have a problem. And that's what the government's own National Housing Supply and Affordability Council is telling us. There's a real issue. During the contributions made by those opposite, they failed to refer to the positive policies the coalition took the last election, which would have made a real difference in relation to housing supply. And I want to refer to some of those policies to correct the record in this place. I think one of the best policies the coalition took to the last election was to provide a $5 billion fund for road, sewerage and power works, infrastructure works, that could be applied by state governments and local governments to actually open up new land for development, to actually provide the infrastructure for new land to be opened up. There was also a very good policy, in my view, with respect to processing environmental approvals under the EPBC Act. Now, my office is in a place called Springfield, beautiful place called Springfield in what's called the Southwest Corridor in Queensland, one of the fastest growing areas of Queensland. There are thousands of lots which could be built on tomorrow, which are stuck in the EPBC Act process in Canberra. Some of these thousands of lots have been stuck in that process for years, for up to 5 years. It is madness. I actually assisted one owner of a property, and I won't provide the details to protect their confidentiality, but I assisted one owner of a property who wanted to build a childcare centre, which was also desperately in need in the area, and the rigmarole that they had to go through in terms of dealing with the EPBC Act was just extraordinary. I mean, it made absolutely no sense at all. On any objective, rational basis, it made no sense. And it was a question of the bureaucracy simply saying no and being obstructionist until, after numerous representations, a pathway was found. But the system's got to work better than that. It's just ridiculous. Thousands of lots which could have been built upon, which are still going through an EPBC Act process. Absolutely absurd. And so the Coalition was right to take a policy to the last election with respect to that. Deputy President, I commend Senator Bragg on this disallowance motion. I think the vast majority of Australians, their dream is to own their own house or own their own apartment. It is not to be renters for life. You actually have the most control over your future destiny by being an owner of the place where you live, owning your own house, owning your own apartment, and I think that is the dream, the Australian dream, and it should be a realisable dream. Every single Australian family should have the opportunity to own their own home or apartment, to own their own home. And I don't want us to pass policy which builds this notion, contributes to this notion that we're going to become a nation of renters. I think it will be extraordinarily unfortunate if that is the Australia we become. In relation to the mechanics of the relevant regulation, can I just say this? I'll give you my definitive legal advice with respect to the regulation and the details. It's complicated. It's extraordinarily complicated. Can I tell you? It's a maze of requirements you need to go through in relation to meet the build to rent development determination. For a start, in order for something to be an affordable dwelling, the rent payable under the lease for the dwelling must be 74.9% or less of the market value of the right to occupy the dwelling under that lease. Now, just think about that. What we're saying is, for something to be an affordable dwelling under this in a build-to-rent development, the rent payable has to be less than 75% of what the market's saying the rent should be. How's that going to work? How's that going to work? And the landlord needs to go out and test the market in terms of demonstrating that a comparable property in the same area would have a rent which is 25%, at least 25% more than what the build-to-rent affordable dwelling is to have. And then we've got income thresholds for those who are renting. So if the tenant is a single adult, the income threshold is 120% of average annual earnings, which I found a bit curious. I'm not sure what the policy reasoning is behind that threshold. But I find it a bit curious if we're talking about affordable housing, the income threshold for a single adult is 120% of average annual earnings. I'm not sure why that's the case. I would have thought that if you're providing affordable housing, your target market should be those who aren't earning over average annual earnings. But that's my thought anyway. And if the tenants include 2 or more adults but no dependent children, then it can be 130% of average annual earnings. I would have thought what you're trying to achieve is to provide dwellings for people who are earning less than annual earnings. So I'm not sure why the thresholds are at that rate. And then you need to test the annual earnings of your tenants on a basis on the basis of certain events which occur, and you've got to do that after each assessing event, and then there's a list of assessing events. So this is complicated. This is complicated, and there are situations where the owner of these developments can go and get a tax ruling. There's got to be monitoring and supervision of this. There's going to have to be auditing, etc., etc. Wouldn't it just be simpler to come up with policy parameters and settings which actually incentivise builders to go and build dwellings? Wouldn't that be simpler?
John?
Wouldn't that be simpler rather than coming up with this complicated scheme which is giving tax benefits to offshore investors? It's quite extraordinary. It's quite extraordinary. And this is just going to be a tangle of red tape. A tangle of red tape which is going to add to development costs every step of the way. A tangle of red tape. So it'll be very interesting to see how this works in practice. But on the face of it, I find it difficult to understand what the incentive would be for someone to build a dwelling, for an investment manager who's investing the funds of someone they owe duties to, fiduciary duties to, with respect to how their funds are invested. I find it difficult to see how it can be in the best interests of the investors to build dwellings which they can only charge less than 75% of the market rate. How do you justify that? If I was investing a fund and someone was saying, I'm going to build a dwelling, but I'm going to charge less than 75% of the market rate, my question would be, well, why am I investing in your fund? Why don't I go and invest in a fund that charges the market rate? So I'm not really sure how this is going to work in practice, and I'm not sure how the withholding tax dispensation actually provides the motivation for people to do this. But it is a tangle of red tape, a tangle of red tape. There's no question about that, and I really do question whether or not this is going to work the way it's intended to work in practice, and that's why I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to support Senator Bragg's disallowance motion. And I would like to take this opportunity, Acting Deputy President, and I'm sure you'd agree with me, to commend Senator Bragg with respect to his advocacy in relation to housing issues. He has been a champion. Senator Bragg has been a champion of the Australian dream, the dream of every single Australian to own their own home.
Thank you very much, Senator Scarr. Any other senators that want to make a contribution on this disallowance motion? There being none? Okay, so the question is that the disallowance motion that's moved by Senator Bragg on the disallowance of the tax assessment build to rent developments determination 2024 be agreed to. Now, those of that opinion say aye. Aye. Those against say no. No. I think the noes have it. Is a division required? Okay. Now, it being after 6:30, we will defer that vote until the next day of sitting. Now we'll move to government business orders of the day. Number one, Clerk. Myself.
Government business orders of the day. Number one, Fair Work Amendment, Protecting Penalty and Overtime Rates Bill 2025. Continuation of debate on the second reading and the amendment moved by Senator Kovacic.
Thank you very much, Clerk, for that. I'm not here to do your job. Now, Senator Henderson, you have the call.
Thank you very much, Acting
Excellent.
Deputy President. Well, it's my pleasure to rise and speak on the Fair Work Amendment Protecting Penalty and Overtime Rates Bill 2025, and I do join with my colleagues in raising serious concerns about this bill. In doing so, I do want to commend the excellent dissenting report handed down by Coalition Senators Kovacic and Sharma in the bill inquiry by the Senate Education and Employment Legislation Committee. The Coalition supports penalty and overtime rates. That is not in question in any respect. But on this side of the chamber, we are concerned about the long-term impact of this bill on employee choice, flexibility, business viability, and particularly the viability of many small and family businesses, as well as national productivity. As this excellent dissenting report makes clear, this bill hits small businesses extremely hard. It risks retrospective application. It does give rise to all sorts of uncertainty. It impacts on employee choice, and it also imposes a risk to work from home arrangements. But from my perspective, Acting Deputy President, I think the biggest concern with this bill is the risk to small and family businesses. Small businesses are being hit with new compliance burdens almost every month under the Albanese government. Evidence shows that owners spend 15 hours a week on compliance, which is time taken away from running their businesses. And the very big difference, of course, between a small business and a large corporation is that small operators cannot absorb the extra costs of meeting regulatory burdens, and of course does lead to real pressures on so many small businesses and, of course, business closures. And at a time in our country when so many families, so many small businesses under pressure, they do not need anything to make their job more difficult. I really don't think the government cares very much about small business. And if it did care about small business, there is a very, very good case for an amendment to exclude small business, which will be put forward in this debate to be agreed by the Senate. But I do want to make this very important point. The Fair Work Commission already has adequate powers to safeguard penalty rates through the Better Off Overall test. So this is a bill looking with a solution. This bill is a solution looking for a problem. The bill has arisen as a result of the retail industry wanting to pay their workers 35% more. Labor has introduced this bill to kneecap this attempt to pay workers more because it would undermine the influence and power of the unions. So here we have a sector in our economy wanting to reward workers and the government, because of course, as we know, every Labor senator in this place is a representative of a union, and they come in here and they undertake and fulfil their union's business and agenda. But of course, the unions don't care about small business. This government doesn't care about small business, and this bill is further evidence of this. So the bill would enable unions to bring applications to vary existing awards, placing an unfair burden on employers trying to maintain stability for their businesses and their employees. So this adds considerable red tape to small business, which already faces 35 major Fair Work Act changes under Labor, 34 of them which disproportionately affect small business. And the other really important point that I would make is that by constraining the Commission, the bill undermines independence and risks unintended consequences in award variation. As Coalition Senators Kovacic and Sharma have so comprehensively reiterated in their dissenting report, this bill could operate retrospectively. Now, the committee in its majority report denied that, but the evidence to that effect was absolutely clear. And of course, this creates a greater burden for businesses, particularly small businesses, greater uncertainty for them, and of course, it exposes employers to union-driven variations of existing awards. So, as I say, this bill imposes a particular concern for small business. And one of the amendments that's been put forward is that small businesses should be exempt from the bill's operation. If Labor cared about small business, it would agree to this amendment. COSBOA is one of the key stakeholder groups which has warned that this bill will discourage employment and drag down productivity. The Minister, in fact, has no idea how many small businesses will be impacted by this bill. So what we really need from this government is a clear, focused plan to address the needs of small business and the economy. We need policies that make it easier for businesses to expand, hire young Australians and provide opportunities for them to get a foothold in the workforce. I have to say, as a Victorian senator, the situation is particularly dire in Victoria. Everywhere I go, because of the regressive policies of the Allan Labor government in Victoria, because of the massive debt and deficit at a state level, combined, of course, with the massive debt and deficit of this government, businesses are saying, we don't want to trade anymore in Victoria. Businesses are actually saying, we are looking to go to other states. And I know of multiple businesses which have either packed up shop or are planning to move interstate because they do not get a fair go in Victoria. Small businesses make up 97% of all Australian businesses, employing millions of Australians and driving innovation, diversity and resilience across every community. They embody the liberal value of enterprise, where hard work, risk-taking and initiative are rewarded with success and opportunity. Small businesses are not just economic units. They are often family-owned and community-based businesses supporting local jobs and community organisations. However, under this government, small businesses face record insolvencies, higher compliance obligations and rising operational costs. Unlike those opposite, we will always back small business, not burden them, so that they can create jobs, build prosperity and keep community strong. And that is exactly what we are trying to do with this amendment, which, as I say, I don't have a high degree of confidence, but Labor can actually try and restore the faith of small business by supporting this amendment. The bill also removes choice for workers who may prefer higher base salaries, stability in income or flexible arrangements over fluctuating penalty rates. The bill could limit work from home flexibility, with employers first forced into intrusive monitoring to meet record-keeping rules. Many workers prefer the stability of a higher, more consistent base salary. This helps with budgeting, growing superannuation, borrowing capacity and avoiding income volatility. Women in particular highlighted problems where fluctuating penalty earnings make Centrelink and child support estimates very unreliable. Employees should have the freedom to choose pay structures which best suit their circumstances. By forcing a one-size-fits-all framework, the bill locks employees out of arrangements which might better support them. Even if the majority of employees want a particular arrangement, the Commission, and this is particularly egregious, the Commission is prevented from approving it if any hypothetical worker might, at some point, be worse off. So this denies employees the ability to strike a balance between financial security and workplace flexibility. And this goes to the heart of denying employees proper choice in the workplace. It also undermines debates on remote work and flexible hours, issues that matter deeply to today's modern workforce. So instead of empowering employees, the bill strips them of genuine choice. True reform should expand workplace options. True reform should drive the will to invest. True reform should excite young businesses, small businesses to grow, to hire more employees, not to hamper their growth, not to hamper investment, and in many cases not to shut them down. Of course, we've heard a lot about productivity in the last few weeks. The Productivity Roundtable was nothing more than a cover after Labor spent 3 years telling Australians that there was nothing wrong with the economy, everything was going just fine. So we get through the election, and now, of course, the government, at least the Treasurer, is admitting that reform is required and much more needs to be done to address a rapidly declining productivity, rapidly skyrocketing costs of doing business, and a very depressed investment framework for so many businesses. So Australia and Australian businesses need policies which boost output, not entrench rigid, one-size-fits-all arrangements. Business groups warned that the bill would make rostering more rigid and complex, diverting resources into compliance instead of productive work, existing above-award arrangements that deliver higher pay and stability could be invalidated, leaving some workers worse off. And again, that goes to the lack of flexibility and employee choice. And we know in the climate where Australia's productivity has gone backwards, under Labor in just 3 years, it has fallen by more than 5%, and this is the last thing that so many businesses need. Since the Coalition left office, living standards have plummeted by around 6%. Australians are working harder, but they are getting less in return. The government needs to understand that it's not the government that creates jobs, but it's businesses. Large, medium, small and family businesses. And in this depressed climate that we are currently in, where our economy is whimpering along, businesses need every possible opportunity and encouragement to invest. As I say, in Victoria, so many businesses are struggling just to keep the doors open, looking further afield to states like South Australia and New South Wales, where they see a much more investment-friendly climate. So, Acting Deputy President, this is a disappointing bill that is before this Parliament. As the Senate Committee inquiry heard, this government did not want to have confirmed the Fair Work Commission has both the power and proven track record to safeguard penalty and overtime rates. The important point to also make is that the Commission is not only empowered but required under Section 134 of the Fair Work Act to maintain a fair and relevant safety net for employees. I mean, the Fair Work Act is several thousand pages. It is an enormous burden on particularly small businesses. This is going to make things so much tougher and, frankly, Small and family businesses deserve better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Henderson. Minister.
Thank you, Acting Deputy President. I'd like to thank members for their contributions to the debate on the Fair Work Amendment Protecting Penalty and Overtime Rates Bill 2025. This bill is a clear, simple and practical amendment to protect penalty and overtime rates as fundamental entitlements relied on by millions of award-reliant Australian workers. The Albanese government is committed to delivering workplace relations reforms with a clear goal in sight: to get wages moving for Australian workers. We've heard strong support for this bill and the fundamental importance of penalty and overtime rates for employees, particularly from some of the lowest paid workers in our country, those who keep Australia running on weekends, public holidays, early mornings and late nights. We prioritise this bill as one of the first legislative acts of this government because we will always act to protect the pay and conditions of Australian workers. Currently, penalty and overtime rates in modern awards can be rolled up into a single rate of pay, leaving some employees worse off. And in fact, we're actually seeing attempts by some employer groups to do that at this very moment in time, particularly in the retail, banking and clerical industries. This should not be possible to do. Award-reliant employees who rely on their penalty and overtime rates deserve steadfast protection of those entitlements in the minimum safety net. This bill introduces a new principle into the Fair Work Act to protect penalty and overtime rates in modern awards. Specifically, it ensures that these rates cannot be reduced or substituted in ways that do not fairly compensate employees for the penalty and overtime rates that they would otherwise receive. This bill enshrines protections for penalty and overtime rates in modern awards, while not affecting individual flexibility arrangements, the bargaining framework or the Fair Work Commission's ability to correct errors or clarify award terms. This amendment sets out the important principle that penalty and overtime rates cannot be reduced. It does this by adding a new section to the Fair Work Act which says, in exercising its powers, the Fair Work Commission must ensure, firstly, the specified penalty rate or overtime rate in modern awards is not reduced, and secondly, modern awards do not include terms that allow employers to roll up penalty or overtime rates into a single pay rate that do not fairly compensate employees for the penalty and overtime rates they would otherwise receive. This bill introduces a simple amendment to ensure that penalty and overtime rates in the modern awards safety net are protected. I'd like to thank the Senate Education and Employment Legislation Committee for their report on the bill. I know that recommendation 1 and the only recommendation of the committee is that the bill be passed. The committee process provided stakeholders with an opportunity to share their views publicly, and it clearly demonstrated the importance of the bill and the strong support it has received. I thank the Australian Greens for the support of the Chair's report, the intent of the bill and the recommendation from the committee to pass the legislation. I note the Australian Greens' additional recommendation 1 that the Australian Government consider amending Regulation 3.34 of the Fair Work Regulations 2009 to make it an explicit requirement of employers to keep time and wage records, even if exemption rates or an equivalent is in effect. The Government's view is that an amendment of this nature is not necessary. The new principle requires the Commission to ensure that any rolled-up pay arrangement must fairly compensate employees for the penalty and overtime rates they would otherwise receive. It will be a matter for the Independent Commission to satisfy itself that this new standard is met. In contemporary considerations of terms that substitute penalty and overtime rates, the Commission has required record keeping as a means of assessing whether an employee is left worse off. Annualised wage arrangements, for example, contain a record-keeping requirement to ensure an employee receives their full entitlements for their actual hours worked. If an employer does not meet their record-keeping obligations under the Fair Work Act or applicable modern award term, the Fair Work Ombudsman is there to take enforcement action. In relation to the Coalition's dissenting recommendations, Recommendation 1 from the Coalition mentioned that the Australian Government should be required to prepare a comprehensive regulatory impact statement assessing the costs, benefits and productivity effects of the bill before its passage. Let me be clear. The Government is firmly committed to evidence-based policy development and decision-making. This reform, as is the case with all reforms, was assessed to determine the appropriate level of impact analysis required. The Office of Impact Analysis determined that an impact analysis was not required for this reform because it does not impose new obligations on employers nor introduce any new regulation or processes for them to comply with. It's actually about sticking with things as they currently stand rather than imposing new obligations. To address concerns about the bill's impact on productivity, it has never been and never will be the solution, at least for this government, to make workers do more for less. This government is committed to improving productivity and enhancing economic resilience, but we do not accept that sending hard-working award-covered workers backwards through reductions to their penalty and overtime rates is the way to do this. The path to achieving flexibility and productivity gains can be found in cooperative and good faith enterprise bargaining rather than by undermining award entitlements. Our bargaining reforms increased access for workers and employers, including small business, to negotiate agreements with their employees and unions. This includes greater access to multi-employer bargaining, reducing the cost and effort of bargaining, and changes to improve clarity and certainty for agreement approval. We're now seeing record enterprise agreement coverage with significantly improved wages outcomes for workers. There's a number of points that have been made about the role of the Fair Work Commission, and we respect the Commission's role as the independent industrial tribunal. The Commission will continue to interpret and apply the Fair Work Act, including the new principle introduced by this bill. This process will be guided by its usual consultative approach, ensuring all interested parties have the opportunity to present their views. This bill also preserves the Commission's existing powers to remove an ambiguity, uncertainty, or to correct an error in a modern award. We've listened to concerns raised following introduction that this bill could require the Commission to review all modern awards for compliance with the new principle, or to review penalty and overtime rates, even if beyond the scope of a specific application. This has never been the intent of this bill. We are confident that the bill as introduced would not have operated in this way. However, this government is committed to genuine consultation, including with employer representatives and unions, and we amended the bill in the House for the avoidance of doubt and to further provide certainty to stakeholders. The bill is unequivocally clear. It will not require the Commission to undertake a review of all modern awards, initiate a review of any award terms outside the scope of an application before the Commission, or exercise its powers under Part 2 to 3 of the Fair Work Act to make, vary or revoke modern awards. In conclusion, for many award-reliant employees, penalty and overtime rates are a critical part of their take-home pay. As we know, it's low-paid workers, women and young people who are more likely to be reliant on awards, as well as those working in retail and hospitality who often work unsociable and irregular hours. This bill is about fairness. It's about respecting the millions of Australians who work public holidays, weekends, late nights and early mornings. And if you get your penalty rates, you deserve them. This bill is about making sure the safety net does what it's meant to do, protect those who need it most. And on that basis, I commend the bill to the Senate.
Thank you very much, Minister. Now, the question that is before the Chair is that the second reading amendment that is moved by Senator Kovacic be agreed to. Now, those of that opinion say aye. Those against, no. No. I think the noes have it. The ayes have it. Now, it being after 6:30, we'll have to defer this vote until the next day of sitting. Clerk. And just to be clear, we're moving to the next bill. So, Clerk, you have the call.
Government Business Orders of the Day number 2, Aged Care and Other Legislation Amendment Bill 2025 and a related bill, second reading debate.
Hello, Senator. You have the call.
Thank you. So I rise to speak on the Aged Care and Other Legislation Amendment Bill 2025 and the associated levy bill, which is integral in delivering the Aged Care Act of 2024 and hence is absolutely essential to delivering the recommendations of the Aged Care Royal Commission, which was instituted under the former coalition government. We will not be standing in the way of the passage of these bills. But let me be very clear. The Aged Care Act of 2024 was a package of reforms of the Labor Party's making. and it was not a co-designed act alongside the coalition. That's why it is of no surprise that in the first week of the 48th Parliament, this government has introduced this bill particularly to amend 325 items of the Aged Care Act 2024 that they pushed through this parliament, refusing to pass any sensible amendments put forward by anybody in this chamber. Many of those could have been rectified during the debate on the Aged Care Act had the government listened to the sector and to the people in this chamber, because the coalition always knew a reform of this size could not be implemented in just a matter of months. And that's why, during the debate on the Aged Care Act, the coalition moved amendments to ensure that the home care package program particularly could exist on a transitional basis without the need to actually amend the Aged Care Act, nor delay its enactment. This amendment mitigated the risk of the department and the sector readiness by creating transitional provisions to ensure the Aged Care Act 2024 could come into effect on the 1st of July 2025, as the government had been promising, and ensuring that the new supported home program, with the promised additional 83,000 home care packages, could commence on the 1st of July 2025. But those opposite voted against it. And now, as a result of their failure to actually listen to sensible reforms to provide the flexibility to implement their reform, older Australians have been denied their rights for many more months. And they've been denied the care that they've been assessed as needing by this government because of their failure to actually be prepared to put the transitional provisions in place.
Senator Ruston, it now being 7:30, I propose that the Senate do now adjourn. Senator Whittaker.
Thank you, Acting Deputy President. Western Australia has long been the engine room of Australia's economy. Our iron ore industry not only built our economy, but it has underpinned our nation's export strength for decades. Last year alone, WA mined more than 860 million tonnes of iron ore. And behind every tonne are thousands of workers. Miners, train drivers, engineers, maintenance crews, port operators and contractors, and many more. Many of them union members whose labour has built our nation's prosperity. Behind them, families and communities in Karratha, Port Hedland, Newman, Tom Price, Paraburdoo and Onslow that depend on the stability of this industry. But as the world moves to net zero, the way we make and use steel must change. That is why green iron is a great opportunity for our nation. It's an opportunity that will safeguard our economy, create secure jobs and help us cut our emissions. An opportunity to create a new multi-billion-dollar manufacturing industry. If we stand still, we risk our largest export industry being left behind. That would mean fewer jobs and a much harder path to net zero, and frankly, a weaker economy. My union, the Australian Manufacturing Workers Union, has been clear about what is at stake and what is possible. The AMW has been clear about how we can do this right, guaranteeing secure union jobs and strong collective bargaining, with all green iron projects receiving the support they need for enterprise agreements and unions along the journey from day one, to ensure decent wages, safe workplaces and secure conditions. Investment in TAFE and clean energy training, particularly in the Pilbara in hubs like Karratha and Port Hedland, so that locals, apprentices and young workers have the pathways they need into the jobs of the future. Consulting with First Nations communities with genuine co-ownership stakes and agreements for projects built on their land. Commitments for local housing, childcare, health and community services, so that the growth in these towns doesn't repeat the housing crises of the past. support for onshore processing and green steelmaking, so we're not just exporting green iron but building domestic manufacturing jobs in WA and across the country. That's why the Albanese Labor government is investing $1 billion through the Green Iron Investment Fund to help set up new facilities and supply chains. This is a priority for our government under the Future Made in Australia plan. Our government is committed to working with industry, unions and communities to see this future come to reality. Labor will always be the party of the worker and the only party that has taken real action to work in partnership with industry and workers and community for a transition. When those opposite would rather us ship it out, ship the jobs out, Labor is doing the work that we need to build the industries for the future right here under our Future Made in Australia plan. WA has always built the industries that power our nation, and we can do it again. Thank you, Acting Deputy President.
Senator Antic.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. Back in 1990, the media landscape was quite different, and the only media channels which existed then were mainstream television, radio and newspapers. So control of the narrative was limited to a few select outlets, meaning it was easy to control. Now, the connections between the security state, the intelligence community and the media are well established. I think it's made up. We'll look no further than Operation Mockingbird in the US in the early years of the Cold War. And think it's just in the US? Well, rest assured that the mainstream media all over the world is replete with friends of the corporate sector, Five Eyes intelligence sharing network between Australia, Canada, New Zealand, UK and the USA, and the administrative state. In the USA, this has been called the blob. The mid-90s then brought about the mass market adoption of the internet, which spread across the globe, and the blob championed this new tech with the establishment lauding the information superhighway with its potential to boost education and spread free speech. It's hard to imagine anyone predicted the enormous shift in the media landscape, though, as smartphones and social media allowed the rise of independent media returning real journalism to our screens. And before long, people started to switch off the mainstream media, and today people like me have begun to understand what we get from these outlets basically is bread and circuses at best and outright propaganda at worst. I actually have to say I barely bother with a single word written in mainstream newspapers. I never switch on the radio or the TV, because now you can get your news from people who are free from the corporate media landscape, and this has dented the control the blob once had over your life. Twitter's internal files released between March 2022 to December 2023 in the United States showed the cosy link between the US intelligence services, big tech and government. And US journalist Michael Schellenberger described what he found as the censorship industrial complex. They were creating blacklists and pressuring social media platforms to censor, de-amplify and even outright ban people from free speech. And that's just happened in the United States, right? Well, it wouldn't be happening in Australia, would it? Well, think again. The Department of Home Affairs here in Australia got caught red-handed dobbing in Aussies to big tech during COVID. The effect of the new media has been quite devastating for the blob, who've swung into full censorship mode to shut down inconvenient political narratives. They've infiltrated everywhere across the country, including this building, and they're pouring their ideas into our legislative chambers by presenting arguments which are all about safety online for children and hate speech. But the truth is, it's all about censorship and control and returning the media landscape to the digital form of where they were up to back in 1990. By year's end, it won't just be social media platforms asking to verify your age. Age verification requirements will also extend to search engine accounts, and age verification will be proven to be basically a vector for identity verification. Now, last year, I opposed the government's hate speech laws and the under-16 social media bans for these and other reasons. The mainstream media is cheering these laws on. They don't care about your children. What they care about is their market share. And just by the way, how come the same censorship dragnet is being played out across the Western world at exactly the same time? How come the intelligence community in the US, Canada, UK, Australia and New Zealand all use the exact same language of disinformation and hate speech and demanding legislation for governments to curb real-world harm online. Suppose that's just a coincidence. National leaders, representatives of international organisations and philanthropists have expressed their commitment to fostering free speech and open societies, but sadly, their actions tell a very different story. Now, Five Eyes Intel gives Australia high-level intel capabilities, but does the alliance's secrecy and US-centric focus expose us to external pressures? Who checks on this unchecked surveillance, and what's the real agenda? The blob's leaders, frankly, are driven by the fear that the internet and social media platforms empower populist alternative views which they regard as unhelpful.
Senator Steele-John.
Thank you, Acting President. Tonight I bring to attention an issue that is being raised loudly by the Western Australian community. The health and longevity of our environment cannot be sacrificed to a further mining development. Many in the community hold a deep appreciation for WA's beautiful Jarrah forests. What many don't know is that a US-based mining corporation, Alcoa, has been clearing WA's Jarrah forests for 60 years. If this wasn't bad enough, this corporation is now wanting to clear an additional 11,408 hectares of our Jarrah forests. Alcoa's proposed expansion could impact over 100,000 potential nesting trees for black cockatoos and clear critical quokka habitats. Cockatoo nesting trees can take hundreds of years to develop, but Alcoa wants to clear them away with one devastating sweep. This project not only puts our vulnerable wildlife at risk, but for the 2.4 million residents in Perth, there is a high risk of contamination to our water supply. If the Serpentine Pipehead Dam is contaminated by these operations, over 100,000 Perth households could be consuming contaminated water within hours. These kinds of hard lines are precisely those which must not be crossed under any circumstances. Our community will not take this lying down. Thousands of people have called on the government to hold Alcoa to account, and I want to thank everyone who submitted to the WA EPA in opposition to the expansion of Alcoa's mine. The Greens, including my Greens WA colleagues, are with you and will passionately campaign alongside you in opposition to this. I want to highlight the incredible engagement and advocacy and dedication of tens of thousands of people in WA and across Australia who are pushing back against these destructive environmental projects. Thank you to everyone who recently made a submission to the EPA regarding Alcoa's expansion. Thank you to the organisations like the WA Forest Alliance and other environmental campaigns who have organised across the state of WA to ensure that people's voices are heard. Now, we know that WA has a deep history of mining companies coming into our regional areas and leaving when the money has been made. Mining developers like Alcoa have a poor track record of environmental clean-up and rehabilitation. Indeed, according to the WA Department, Alcoa has failed to rehabilitate to meet its very own rehabilitation targets for over 27,000 hectares of native vegetation already. Australia's lands and oceans are being mined and trawled and exploited for corporate profit, with little given to our communities. We have over 5.7 million tonnes of material in our oceans from the gas and oil infrastructure that is the product of these industries. It is equivalent to 110 Sydney Harbour bridges worth of steel. All of this material in our oceans because of these polluting industries. And this is an opportunity to create a truly circular economy by salvaging this material and making it new again. The recently released WA Can't Wait report passed a clear way forward to resolving these issues. Labor
Thank
must
you, Senator
act.
Steele-John. Senator McKenzie.
Deputy President. Last week I stood in a tiny town, Marnoo, population 99, in the heart of the Mallee. And I stood with Anne Webster, their local federal MP, local councillors and hundreds of farmers and their families who were standing up for their future. They'd asked me to bring their fight to here to the Australian Senate to make sure particularly the Labor Party and the Greens understand the impact of this reckless race to 100% renewables. It is an absolute case of out of sight, out of mind when it comes to Chris Bowen and indeed Premier Jacinta Allen's energy policies. And it is rural and regional communities who are paying the price. The desecration of our land, our livelihoods and of our very communities. And similar protests are happening right across not just the Wimmera Mallee but across regional Australia. Because government is now pushing this project onto these communities. That day we burnt the draft plans for the VNI West project, a 500 kV double-circuit transmission line running approximately 240 kilometres across Victoria, then north into New South Wales to link with the Energy Connect project. The Victorian section alone will likely need around 600 transmission towers, every single one as tall as the Parliament House flag mast that is above us at 80 metres. And the cost, AEMO's own figures show it is blown out from $3.9 billion, with some estimates now hitting $11.4 billion. Net zero does not mean net zero cost. That's been the hoax from the start. Someone has to pay. And it turns out it's rural and regional communities. And this community in Marnoo were very, very clear last week. They will be locking their gates. They are prepared to go to jail against a government that is determined to override their private property rights, determined to enter their farms without permission, with the inherent biosecurity risk. And this project has not only caused economic harm with property values plummeting on intergenerational assets, on food security, food production, and it is also having environmental and social costs with families torn apart as a result. This Victorian Labor government has form. It's the same government that sent police into people's homes during COVID, that locked up citizens without a second thought, that now gives itself new powers to force entry onto private land, silence objections from farmers whose livelihoods are at stake. It's a government with the worst instincts of authoritarianism, zero care for its citizens when it wants its own way. Net zero is just a marker in time, a date on a calendar. It measures neither the path taken nor the fairness, the reliability, the affordability of the transition. And remembering this is a 95% renewable target by 2035. They're in a hurry, and it is to appease urban voters
in the middle of Melbourne who don't have to put up with the social, economic and environmental costs that this project brings. Right now, we're intent on creating two classes of citizens in Australia: those who advocate for and benefit from the national emissions reduction efforts, and those in the regions who are paying the price through falling property values, loss of amenity and, in some cases, the broken bonds of their communities and families. If we want to keep the faith with the people that actually feed this nation, before those first 600 towers start, the Victorian government needs to stop this project and go back to the drawing board. The National Party stands with those farmers and their families in Manu, just like we stand with every single rural and regional community that is putting up with Labor's rush to renewables.
Senator Payman.
Thank you, Acting Deputy President. At estimates earlier this year, I asked for a breakdown of gifts from Salesforce to NDIA officials, of which as many as 100 had gone undisclosed, contrary to NDIA's own finance policies. Now, I want to start by thanking the Minister for responding so quickly to the order to produce documents made in the last sitting fortnight. I also acknowledge the interference of the election, ministerial changes, and the NDIA machinery of government change that no doubt complicated the process. However, it should not take 6 months plus a warning from me that I would seek an explanation from the Minister after question time for the Minister's office to finally deliver answers. And even then, with just 9 minutes left to question time, they scrambled to drop a flimsy, inadequate response to what was a serious and extensive line of questions. That, Acting Deputy President, is not good enough. The documents tabled were quite revealing as to the scale of Salesforce's whining and dining of NDIA officials. The document, referred to as Confidential Annexure E, paints a particularly concerning picture, and it is no wonder that Salesforce requested in a letter to the chair of the Joint Committee of Public Accounts and Audit that the document should be kept confidential and not published. The annexure shows 23 NDIA officials accepting gifts and hospitality worth over $15,000 between 2019 and 2023. One senior executive service Labour hire employee alone racked up more than $99,000 in hospitality before quietly leaving the agency. Let's go through a few of these gifts for the benefit of the Senate and the public out there who deserve transparency, and I note that I'll be referring to the total cost of the gift rather than the value per NDIA attendee, as is listed in the document. 7th June 2019, golf and lunch at Kingston Health Golf Club, valued at $172. 18 June 2020, lunch at Cicciolina and taxi, $231. 19 January 2022, dinner at Matilda and taxi, $357. 13 December 2021, lunch at Supernormal, $494. 3rd December 2020, dinner at Vue de Monde and taxi, $531. 26 May 2021, dinner at Tonka, $646. And finally, 18 January 2023, dinner at French Brasserie and taxi, $1,170. There are 111 more entries on that list, so you can imagine that the relationship between the NDIA and Salesforce during this period was quite friendly. During the same period, Salesforce's contracts with the NDA ballooned by 500%, from $27 million in April 2020 to $135 million in October 2023. This matter has rightly been referred to the National Anti-Corruption Commission, so I won't ask the government to speculate on individual culpability. But what the government must confront is how they will address the culture of flouting disclosure requirements within the NDIA. They need to ensure our integrity framework is effective in not just rooting out corruption, but also acting as a deterrent. When the NAC in July chose not to name the senior Home Affairs official found to have corruptly promoted her sister's fiancé, what message did that send? That even if you get caught doing the wrong thing,
you won't be held accountable. If findings of corruption are made, particularly against the SES official who accepted nearly 2/3 of Salesforce's gifts by value, then those names must be published. And it needs to be set as an example that if you betray the trust of the Australian people, you will pay a heavy price. Because at the end of the day, it's in the name, public service. You're not there to play rounds of golf. You're not there to gourmandize $1,000 dinners. You are there to serve the Australian public. And if you can't remember that, you have no place in the service of our nation. Thank you.
Senator Askew.
Thank you, Acting Deputy President. I rise tonight to pay my respects to a remarkable Tasmanian, the Honourable Sir Guy Green, AC, KBE, CVO, a distinguished statesman who lived a life of service and commitment to Tasmania. Sir Guy, who passed away earlier this month at the age of 87, led a life of exceptional service, which was driven by his deep passion and love for our island state home. Throughout his many roles in arts, law, education and governance, he will be remembered as a passionate and determined leader who had a great sense of humour and love for his community. One of his most notable positions was as Tasmania's 47th Governor, a role that he held between 1995 and 2003. Significantly, he was the first Tasmanian-born person to hold this prestigious role. As Governor, Sir Guy will be remembered for his dedication and devotion to Tasmania, often going above and beyond his duties. Sir Guy was born in Launceston in 1937 and attended Launceston Church Grammar School. He graduated with a Bachelor of Law from the University of Tasmania's Hobart campus in 1960. After a career in private practice, Sir Guy served as a magistrate from 1971 and was appointed Tasmania's Chief Justice in 1973. As Chief Justice, he pioneered modern judicial processes and presided over important cases while upholding the integrity of the law. Tasmanian Liberal Premier Jeremy Rockliff remembered Sir Guy Green as an exceptional statesman and true leader with a passion for Tasmania, summarised with this tribute, and I quote, "Sir Guy's life reminds us that true leadership is measured by purpose and service. Tasmania is richer for his contributions and he will be remembered with deep respect and gratitude." End quote. Sir Guy was heavily involved in community, including his 10-year tenure as Chancellor of the University of Tasmania between 1985 and 1995. During this time, he navigated a difficult period in the history of the university, when the southern-based UTAS amalgamated with the Northern Tasmanian State Institute of Technology. He was closely involved with the amalgamation process, helping to draft the enabling legislation which invented the new University of Tasmania. His leadership guided the university during a tumultuous time, transforming UTAS into the institution it is today, assisting many Tasmanian, national and international students to get the modern tertiary qualifications they require to enter the workforce in an ever-changing world. In recognition of his outstanding career, Sir Guy was made a Knight Commander of the Order of the British Empire in 1982. He was appointed a Companion of the Order of Australia in 1994, made a Companion of the Royal Victorian Order during Queen Elizabeth II's visit to Tasmania in 2000 and awarded the Centenary Medal in 2001. Sir Guy had an eminent career deserving of this recognition. And even after his formal retirement, Sir Guy's commitment to his community continued as he served on several boards, particularly around his interest in arts and cultural institutions, including the Tasmanian Museum and Art Gallery, or TMAG, and the 10 Days on the Island event. The depth of his engagement and commitment is evidenced by the length of tenure with each. For example, he served as chair of the TMAG board for over 11 years, and during this time he oversaw significant projects at TMAG, including the redevelopment of the Hobart City site and the creation of the collection and research facility, as well as many important acquisitions and bequests. Interestingly, the many tributes published noting his passing also highlighted the personal side to Sir Guy, reflections of his wicked sense of humour, profound intellect and deep commitment to Tasmania highlighted how he will be remembered most by his family, friends and former colleagues. Sir Guy was a complex and passionate individual whose legacy will be felt in Tasmania for decades. I extend my condolences to Lady Green and Sir Guy's family and thank them for their part in Sir Guy's journey of service to all Tasmanians. Thank you.
Senator Shoebridge.
Productivity and AI. They're words everyone in this place is obsessed with, but no one seems to know exactly what they mean by them. Maybe it's the vibe or something. Well, let me tell you what I think they mean. When this government talks about productivity, they mean squeezing more output from fewer people. When they talk about AI, they mean replacing human workers with machines that don't need inconvenient things like wages, sick leave or human dignity. And even if the government doesn't think that's what they mean, the corporations flogging AI certainly do. Clankers are being rolled out across our country with virtually no oversight. And it's telling that our youngest generation has already given AI this new slur. Generation Alpha can smell the false promise of technology that won't actually benefit them, but will likely impoverish their lives and devastate the planet they'll inherit. The Prime Minister promises this will make us a productivity powerhouse. Well, I call bull on that. It's workhouse, more like. And the lesson of the last decades is clear. We need more humanity, not less. When robots decide entitlements, people die under robo-debt. We need to stop just asking billionaires to please be nice to us with their rapacious extractive technology. And the choice is clear. We can have technology that serves humanity or humanity that serves technology. And we must act now before the clankers have become so embedded that we lose control of our own destiny. The future of work, of creativity and human dignity hangs in the balance. Deputy President, Ayman, a proud Palestinian Australian, reached out to tell me this today about his family in Gaza. My family, my father, my siblings, my cousins who live in Gaza City, in one of the old neighbourhoods in Palestine, are facing two choices: to be killed or displaced. We are seeing Israeli tanks 15 minutes from my family. There has been total destruction of the northern neighbourhoods in Gaza City. People are witnessing unimaginable bombings. The family, the people have been pushed to the heart of Gaza City, and that is where my family is. Now, I've heard from my cousin in Gaza City that random missiles and tanks are just hitting constantly where all the people are. The random bombing is paving the way for troops to occupy Gaza. And I want to say to the media and Australian politicians, you are talking about 2 million people in abstract. But these are people I have hugged, eaten with, laughed with. They are trying to survive, live through this unbelievable suffering. Israeli troops are now asking people to be displaced again. Likely, as they did at the start of the genocide, they are doing this, starved after witnessing loss and being displaced so many times. Many are not able to walk. People are staying home, not just because of the bombs falling, but to conserve energy because there is no food. We need to act now. Well, yes, Ayman, we do. In fact, we needed sanctions against Israel yesterday. While the genocide in Palestine has impacted all, I spoke to Christian Palestinians this week who have relayed some horrific information. The compound of St Porphyri's Greek Orthodox Church and the compound of the Holy Family Latin Church in Gaza City, they sit side by side, have become shelters for hundreds of women and children and the elderly. And like the rest of Gaza City's residents, the people who are sheltering within these walls are listening to the bombs drop around them, fighting off starvation. Members of the community told me that today in Gaza, fewer than 1,000 Christians remain from what was once a vibrant community. And in their words, leaving Gaza City and trying to flee south would be nothing short of a death sentence for them. For this reason, the priests and sisters have decided to stay and continue caring for all those who remain within the compounds. We do not know exactly what will happen on the ground, not only to our faithful but to all residents. We can only repeat what we have said before. There can be no future built on captivity, displacement or revenge against Palestinians. Well, thank you for those words. And Israel's attack on the Christian community in Palestine is not just in Gaza. In Jerusalem, they have frozen the bank accounts of the Greek Orthodox Church, crippling the church's ability to serve their community, whilst priests and nuns are assaulted and spat on. The wall around Bethlehem, the birthplace of Christ, and I've been there, it has turned into an open-air prison. While in the West Bank, Israeli settlers are attacking Christian villages like Tabor. They're uprooting ancient olive trees, seeking to erase the Christian presence and more than 2,000 years of history. Regardless of faith, regardless of age, regardless of history, Gaza has become a killing field and occupied Palestine a prison and a place of fear and displacement. This is the reality, and this is why the world is crying out to free Palestine and ensure equal rights for all.
Senator Tyrrell.
You know, it's a cliche to say that we all get here on the back of hard work of others. When it comes to civil construction, it's literally true. Everyone who travelled here has a team of civil construction workers to thank for making it to Canberra in one piece. And yet, when was the last time you thought about the people who built the road you're driving on or the airport your plane is landing in? Last Friday evening, I had the privilege of attending the Civil Contractors Federation Earth Awards in Tasmania. It was their night of nights, the one evening each year when over 2,000 civil construction workers swap their steel-cap boots for dress shoes and celebrate the best of the state's big builds. You can tell they'd been looking forward to it. The people in the room, representatives of businesses big and small, all through the sector, all through the supply chain, and you'd be forgiven for thinking there'd be some tension. Supplying a table of business rivals, a night to cut loose and a bar tab, and to be forgiven for expecting some frostiness. But the vibe in the room didn't feel like competitors in a crowded field fighting for supremacy. It felt like a room of colleagues, people happy just to not be at work, just to get a chance to hang out and let their hair down. Friday's ceremony was particularly moving because it honoured the late Ashley Cooper, with a new award established in his name for Civil Apprentice or Trainee of the Year. On the night, I heard one story remembering Ashley that I loved. Back in his university days at Swinburne, the university noticed his grades slipping and he was on scholarship with minimum grades to maintain. They brought him in for a please explain. So in he shuffles, tail between his legs. Where had he been, they asked. Uganda. Doing what, they asked. Building an orphanage. There aren't many people who can walk into a meeting about losing your scholarship and walk out with a second, even bigger scholarship. But that's exactly what Ash did. It was beautiful to hear the way that Ash and his wife Tash together made such a massive contribution, both professionally and personally, to so many lives all over the world. I heard about a man who had backed his abilities, project management, problem solving, building something from nothing and used them to genuinely change the world. So I'm really excited to see what the inaugural winner of the Ashley Cooper Civil Apprentice or Trainee of the Year, Lynette Richards, yep, a lovely woman, backs herself to deliver. No doubt she will do the honour proud. The awards themselves showcased extraordinary achievement. Hazel Brothers, a family-owned Tasmanian company of over 80 years, took home 5 awards. Their projects, from the Blackburn River Superstructure replacement to the Devonport East Quay Link works, demonstrate that local companies can deliver world-class infrastructure while employing hundreds of Tasmanians. Tasmania's $786 million new Bridgewater Bridge has been shortlisted for the 2025 Australian Construction Achievement Award. This is the biggest transport infrastructure project in our state's history, and it's being delivered by Tasmanian workers for Tasmanian communities. What struck me most at Friday's celebration wasn't just the scale of these projects, but their impact. This industry doesn't just pour concrete and lay asphalt. It connects our communities, enables our businesses to compete globally, and builds the platforms on which Tasmania's entire economy stands. As we consider Tasmania's future, the message from Friday night was clear. Civil construction is more than $2 billion a year it brings in, or the over 2,000 people it employs directly. Civil construction's shaping what the next 30 years of Tasmania will look like. I want to thank the Civil Contractors Federation for their invitation and congratulate all nominees and winners. After witnessing the skill, dedication and quiet excellence of this industry, I'm genuinely heartened to know Tasmania's future infrastructure is in such capable hands. These are the Tasmanians who, without fanfare or recognition, are quite literally building our state's future. They deserve our respect, our investment, and at least once a year, our applause.
Senator Sharma.
Thank you, Acting Deputy President. Well, earlier today, the Australian public and the Australian Parliament heard frankly alarming news about the hostile acts of a foreign power directed against Australia and Australian national interests. In comments by the Director-General of Security, Mike Burgess, he made clear that ASIO's formal assessment is that the Iranian government directed at least 2, and quite possibly more, quite likely more, attacks on Jewish interests in Australia. This has included the attack on the Continental Kitchen in part of Sydney that I know very well, in Bondi, and also the Adass Synagogue in Melbourne. I cannot overstate the severity and the gravity of what has been unfolding here in Australia over these last several months, and I cannot overstate the severity and gravity of a foreign nation acting like this on Australian soil. We have all been alarmed in Australia about the deterioration in social cohesion and social harmony. We have all been alarmed in Australia about the rise in anti-Semitism. We have all been alarmed in Australia about the increasing hostility turning into property damage and firebombing directed against a particular group of Australians. To now learn that a foreign power was orchestrating those, directing those, supporting those, and doing all it could to fan the flames of social discord in Australia is a shocking discovery indeed. I wanted to commend the work of our security officials, ASIO and others, for their painstaking investigation to uncover this, and I do want to commend the government for the firm steps they have taken, at least in the response to this initially. It is right and proper that the Iranian ambassador be expelled from Australia, declared persona non grata and sent packing and sent home. It is right and proper that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, an arm of the Iranian regime and state, is added to our sanctions list and designated, and it is only prudent that Australian officials stationed in Tehran at our embassy in Tehran are evacuated for their own safety. But let's be very clear about the sort of government we are dealing with here, a regime more properly in Iran. Not only do they repress their own citizens at home, not only do they persecute minorities and women, not only do they execute gay people, not only do they hound civil society to the point of extinction. This is also a regime in a country that has done a huge amount to destabilise the world, that has been responsible for exporting terror across its region, and now we find as far away as Australia. This is a country, a regime, an ideology that nurtured, created, funded and supported Hezbollah, the terrorist organisation that has basically rendered Lebanon in a state of state failure, state chaos for the past 2 decades. This is the same country that funded, supported, armed and trained the Houthis in Yemen, again having rendered now Yemen an ungovernable state, threatening commercial shipping all across the Red Sea. It is the same group, the same country rather, that funded, supported and egged on Hamas, including for Hamas's terrorist attacks on the 7th of October 2023, which have done such awful damage to the Middle East, which have unleashed unbelievable chaos and unbelievable suffering, including on the Palestinian people of Gaza. Iran's hands have been in all of this. And now we learn that Iran's tentacles have spread even as far as Australia. A country, we have maintained diplomatic relations with Iran for several decades. No, we have not agreed on any number of things, but I thought we were at least bound to respect the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations and other underpinnings of formal relations. To learn that Iran has perpetrated hostile acts on Australian soil directed against the Australian people, directed against the Australian community, is shocking indeed. Now, I would say that I commend the government for the strong steps it has taken, but I think more needs to be done. I do believe the government should be orchestrating an international campaign of condemnation and making sure that the rest of the world knows that the Iranian regime is doing this. Because if they're doing it in Australia, you can bet they are trying to do it, or perhaps are already doing it in places like Canada, in places like the United States, in countries like New Zealand, in countries like the United Kingdom, all across Western Europe. And Australia needs to make sure that this terrible regime is held to account for their aggression against our nation.
Senator Roberts.
The New Zealand Royal Commission of Inquiry into COVID-19 Lessons Learned invited several former ministers in New Zealand responsible for their damaging, inhuman and fatal COVID response. These were Jacinda Ardern, former Prime Minister; Chris Hipkins, former Health and COVID-19 Response Minister, current Labor leader; Grant Robertson, former Finance Minister; Aisha Verrall, former Health Minister. All four refused to testify, instead choosing to provide the Hollywood version of their actions in writing, avoiding cross-examination. Jacinda Ardern went so far as to call the Royal Commission a witch hunt. One Nation calls it accountability. To refuse to be held to account for their actions is a signed confession of wrongdoing. Australia and New Zealand reacted to COVID with measures designed to force mass vaccination at huge financial benefit to pharmaceutical companies. This money flowed through to shareholders who are the world's predatory billionaires. It's terrifying that this entire thing, from development of the COVID virus to the COVID measures, including the vaccine injections, was one giant fundraiser for the world's wealthiest people. Yet that is the truth. We know COVID itself is a man-made virus, developed under Anthony Fauci with funding from the United States NIH, that's the National Institutes of Health, administered through Peter Daszak's EcoHealth Alliance. The research was conducted first in the USA and then moved to the Wuhan Institute of Virology from 2014, where it escaped in a lab leak in September 2019 before development was completed. Documents released through the FBI and others prove these facts. This is why the amazing United States Secretary of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, announced the opening of a criminal investigation into Anthony Fauci and his cronies. I wonder if Ms. Ardern considers that a witch hunt. The wheels of justice turn slowly, though they do turn. Ms. Ardern can stare down a Royal Commission now, yet the truth is coming out. It's important to note that in its 2020 press release, Australia's own CSIRO confirmed it was involved in this gain-of-function research. Last February, a new paper was published through CSIRO Publishing entitled Impacts of Long COVID on Disability, Function and Quality of Life for Adults Living in Australia. It found, with long COVID, reported worse disability than 98% of the general Australian population, almost 100%. A total of 86% of those with long COVID met the thresholds for serious disability, compared with 9% of Australians overall. Complex areas, housework and socialising, were badly impacted. People could often meet basic needs, yet their ability to contribute to their homes, workplaces and communities was limited. Quality of life is badly affected. Energy levels and social life were the most impacted, reflecting how fatigue and brain fog affect activities, relationships and community connections. It's without a hint of irony that the CSIRO published a study showing the health damage resulting from the virus they helped create through their support for gain-of-function research. All the evidence we have at the moment suggests long COVID can come from exposure to COVID or from the vaccine, the injections, the shots, some batches more than others. This is because for the first year the COVID shots were not made using good manufacturing process, so batch variation was enormous. Almost immediately the virus appeared. We knew that COVID was the product of gain-of-function research. Nobel Prize-winning virologist Luc Montagnier sequenced COVID in April of 2020 and found unmistakable evidence of human intervention, including the inclusion of a large segment of the HIV virus. And Luc should know he won his Nobel Prize for discovering the HIV virus. The bat virus was spliced in to confuse the human body's immune system into producing the wrong immune response to make the virus more deadly, deliberately. And then, for good measure, they sliced in most of the HIV virus to make the virus more contagious. Let me be clear. Those who died from COVID died from a man-made virus, developed using gain-of-function research to be more deadly and more contagious than the original SARS virus, which was the starting point for the development of COVID. Then the virus was sold to the public as an unfortunate outcome of human interaction with pangolin animals in a wet market in Wuhan, China. It's concerning that so many believe that fanciful story. and overtrust of authority, resulting in a medical tragedy that continues to unfold in a new peer-reviewed and published articles. Here are the latest such articles. Chen et al. mRNA injections cross the placenta and reach the fetus. mRNA 1273 crosses within 1 hour, accumulates in fetal organs, translates into spike protein and persists after birth. Thorpe et al. CDC, FDA safety signal thresholds were breached for 37 adverse events following jabs in pregnant women, including miscarriage, stillbirth and fetal arrest. Karaman et al. mRNA shots destroy 60% of a woman's egg supply, known as primordial follicles. Manish et al. On a sample set of 1.3 million women, found 33% fewer successful pregnancies in women who had the shots. Friedberg et al. On a sample of 493,000 people, almost 500,000, found a 23% increase in autoimmune disease post-shot. And did anyone hear about this study conducted from the United States Centers for Disease Control epidemiologist Dr. Feldstein, published in the Pediatric Infectious Disease Journal, an Oxford University Press peer-reviewed publication? Here it is. Among children aged 6 months to 4 years with no prior COVID infection, those who received the Pfizer-BioNTech mRNA shots were 159% more likely to get infected and 257% more likely to develop symptomatic COVID-19 compared to unvaccinated children without prior infection. This study from the US Department's own CDC clearly shows that a COVID shot in young people has negative efficacy. It makes children more likely to get COVID, and when they do, they experience worse symptoms. That study has resulted in the FDA and now Australia's TGA, at long last, announcing the end of COVID vaccination for children after they told us it was essential. Add that to the mental health damage, development delays and academic damage done to children during lockdown, and the picture is scandalous. This is criminal. This is inhuman. In O'Keefe Media's recent hidden camera video, Johnson & Johnson's lead scientist in regulatory affairs, Joshua Reese, admitted the typical clinical process was abandoned for the COVID-19 vaccine. J&J knowingly bypassed standard testing protocols under pressure from the Biden government. Joshua said, quote, "This was just, let's test it on some lab animals and just throw it into the wind and see what happens." He acknowledges that the public was not informed about the shortcuts, not acknowledged. Did the TGA know that there was no proper safety testing on the J&J product before it was given approval in Australia? Did they? While public officials claimed the vaccines were safe and effective, Reese pushed back, quote, "There's no proof. None of that stuff was safe and effective," end of quote, adding that the industry relies on a benefit-to-risk trade-off to justify product launches. What this means is that the product is justified if it helps more people than it harms. In that scenario, harm is tolerated. If the pharmaceutical company has their thumb on the scale, making harm less and benefit more, then the faulty product makes it to the market. That's exactly what happened with the COVID products, and 20 other products like remdesivir approved in Australia. Now the latest instalment in Frankenstein science is upon us. Listen to this. Self-amplifying RNA vaccines are being tested. saRNA. These are shots which replicate the human body after injection, replicate inside the human body after injection, turning our bodies into genetic material production units, shedding on those around us. This is uninformed consent to vaccination taken to a whole new level. A paper published in the peer-reviewed Journal of Clinical Medicine found that the COVID-19 replicon saRNA injections caused severe blood abnormalities in 93% of trial participants. Symptoms include increased risk of internal bleeding and suppressed immune cells, which raises infection risk. Renowned American cardiologist Dr. Peter McCullough last week commented on saRNA technology, quote, "Vaccinologists have made a critical error in the design of genetic vaccines. Injection of the genetic code for any foreign protein, including parts of viruses, causes the body to respond with an immune attack against its own cells. This leads to intense vaccine injury syndromes all through the human body." He says, giving the vaccines their own life with the ability to reproduce themselves is inhumane, reckless, and from the outset should be flagged as dangerous and potentially lethal to the recipient. End of quote. COVID vaccines were released without proper testing and caused 1,200 deaths in testing alone, in Pfizer alone. Pushing COVID shots killed tens of thousands of Australians. Homicide. If saRNA shots are pushed, it will be genocide, deliberate. Those responsible for COVID have not been held to account, yet now they plan to turn every person and every animal into a genetic material production facility. I've now given 7 of these COVID updates, 70 minutes of proof, scientific proof, medical proof, that we must investigate this criminal enterprise, or this next generation of Frankenstein science, the saRNA, will kill and maim huge numbers of Australians.
Senator Lambie.
Thank you. Eden Westbrook would have turned 26 on the 12th of August, but Eden died in a very public death in tragic circumstances in St Helens, Tasmania, in February 2015. She was found hanging by a rope in St Helens Park in the early morning. The police decided, though, quickly, much too quickly if you ask me, that Eden committed suicide. But the Westbrooks and I, and many others, are convinced that Eden did not take her own life. Eden's mum and dad, Jason and Amanda Westbrook, have fought for over 10 years to get to the truth. There are just too many facts that don't stack up. For example, when Eden's sister saw her body before the cremation, Eden had bruises on her face and neck and her teeth were absolutely shattered. The Westbrooks and others have repeatedly asked the Tasmanian coroner to release Eden's autopsy photos. They also want an inquest and they want an independent coroner to assess the fresh evidence. Unfortunately for the Westbrooks, have been frustrated by the refusal of the coronial authority, including Tasmania's Chief Magistrate, to release the damn photos. Thanks to the Tasmanian Attorney-General, Guy Barnett, and I do thank you from the bottom of my heart, on the 19th of August, the first day of Parliament since the election, tabled a revised bill to compel the provision of the autopsy photos to the Westbrooks by the coroner within 28 days. Those autopsy photos are key to unlocking this case. What do Eden's autopsy photos show? This is what we want to know. A fractured cricoid cartilage in the lower neck, inconsistent with hanging. Damaged teeth, bruising to the neck or face, inconsistent with a blunt force trauma. Bruising or ligature marks on the wrists. Any other undocumented injuries or signs of sexual assault. Why was the autopsy not undertaken by a qualified forensic pathologist in a NATA-accredited mortuary that met national pathology standards? Why were samples like material from beneath her fingernails taken for DNA testing? Why weren't samples like underneath her fingernails taken for DNA testing? The Westbrooks asked Dr. Brian Collins, a respected independent forensic pathologist, to review the available forensics, crime scene photos and consider issues like the manner and cause of death and time of death. Dr. Collins produced a preliminary report in March 2025, and now there is an independent expert evidence of a possible homicide. A copy of the report was provided to the Chief Magistrate in April this year. The Westbrooks believe Eden died on the 18th of February, not the 17th of February 2015, because in the days after Eden's death, a trusted police officer told the Westbrooks there was CCTV footage of Eden at the skate park at 2 a.m. on the 18th of February 2015. His viewing of the relevant footage is confirmed under the ITIs, and that officer unfortunately is now deceased. There are also relevant Facebook posts by a person of interest, including recent ones, which have not been investigated. Importantly, Dr. Collins' written report found that there was no reliable evidence to assist in determining the time of death. The evidence provided by police in affidavits concerning body temperature and rigor mortis was of little or no supportive value. The request by the Westbrooks, Dr. Collins and myself for the release of the autopsy photos has been refused, essentially on the basis that there was no legal proceeding on foot and it was not appropriate for any third party to receive autopsy photos. What a load of rubbish. It seems that early requests to the Tasmania's Coroner's Office did not include disclosure of the autopsy photos, as they were never on the court's coronial file. So does this mean that those photos were never even considered by the coroner? Good question for her to answer tomorrow. And the content of the autopsy photos and the final expert opinion from Dr. Collins are absolutely critical to reopening of the investigation. The Chief Magistrate recently responded to another request for the photos on the 14th of April 2025 after she had been provided with Dr. Collins' report, saying that she was considering the issues and would respond, and I quote, in due course, end quote. Well, 4 months later, still no respect for the family, and I still haven't had a response from you, let alone anyone else. And Dr. Collins' report is outlined on our Little Edie podcast in April 2025. By the way, there are 6 million people following this podcast. Dr. Collins found evidence of possible blunt force trauma to Eden and a second injury to the voice box or lower neck inconsistent with hanging and of the type that should have rung alarm bells. This is contrary contrary to the Chief Magistrate's comment that there was no sign of any trauma to Eden in her decision several years ago to not reopen the matter. Dr Collins advised he was considerably, and I quote, ill at ease, end quote, concerning the adequacy and the completeness of the police investigation and autopsy report. The pathologist who undertook the autopsy didn't even check to see whether Eden had been sexually assaulted. I mean, seriously. It was Dr Collins' opinion that at the completion of the autopsy, the most appropriate cause of death should have been, at very least, and I quote, undetermined. Dr Collins is frustrated and disappointed like we are, and in his 50 years as a practising forensic pathologist, he is unable to remember such a denial to access the photos. 2 additional crime scene photos have recently been discovered after the Coroner's Office forwarded a complete set to a rope expert in Canada who is assisting the family. One item, a hairband, could have been useful in determining who was at the scene that night. Why wasn't it seized as an exhibit? More importantly, why was the rope not seized as an exhibit? The Westbrooks have endured more pain than most. They struggle to understand how the coronial system can be so hostile. As if their grief wasn't enough, they and their families have had to endure gaslighting and intimidation and harassment from local police, particularly in days and months following Eden's death. Amanda and Jason's resilience and determination is remarkable. It is unbreakable, but they shouldn't have to go through this. They need answers. I want answers, and so do the people of Tasmania. Eden's death was treated as a suicide within hours. Minimal forensics were even undertaken, and on the evidence available under the RTIs we've been collecting, the only police exhibit was a set of 10 fingerprints. What do you guess from Eden? Police did not seize, they did her fingerprints, but they couldn't do under her nails. Go figure. Police did not seize Eden's mobile phone or nearby CCTV footage to ascertain her movements that night. They didn't check her social media accounts. They didn't interview critical witnesses. They didn't even check past records of grooming. Inappropriate approaches by persons in authority to young women, and similar events in the St Helens area involving violence. What inquiries were conducted given allegations of pedophilia activity and other inappropriate behaviour by police in St Helens around that time? I certainly hit a nerve with the Commissioner of Police in Tasmania when I raised this issue in Parliament last time in a previous speech. Upon recent inquiries with her, I was advised that one officer of interest was still the subject of an ongoing professional standards investigation. I was very worried about the involvement of Senior Sergeant Paul Reynolds as a coroner's associate in the investigation of Eden's death. The coroner, in delivering her 3-page finding without inquest, stated in 2016 that the late disregarded pedophile, Senior Sergeant Reynolds, had provided regular oversight and direction to the investigation. Section 13(1) of the Tasmanian Coroners Act 1995 states that a coroner may delegate to a coroner's associate any function or power of a coroner other than the power of delegation or a power prescribed by the regulations. What powers, if any, were delegated by the coroner to Senior Sergeant Reynolds in Eden's case and in other cases? It is very worrying to think that Senior Sergeant Reynolds may have been exercising significant powers on behalf of the coroner. We can only hope that Reynolds had no role in drafting the findings in Eden's case, which failed to list the forensic science and autopsy evidence taken into account in determining suicide, and which failed to outline the reasons for determining Eden's death occurring on the 17th rather than the 18th of February. The WISE report, the waste report I call it, commissioned by Tasmanian Police, failed to examine Reynolds' role in Eden's case, despite comprehensive written and oral submissions from the Westbrooks and their then lawyer. In fact, the WISE report failed to even mention Eden's case. It failed on a lot, the WISE report. The coroner's findings also state that there was no available evidence as to the origin of the rope, clearly contradicting police investigative findings, which were never followed up or confirmed. Police didn't even check the docks right across the road. I mean, how lazy are you? You didn't consider the nature and configuration of the rope and what that meant about its likely source. Lazy. Police investigation documents indicate the rope was never seized. Contrary to this, the Coroner's Office advised in writing that the rope was believed to have been destroyed as a result of the 2016 disposal order under the Act. Which account is accurate? Which one? Which one? How are the Westbrooks supposed to mount a case of reopening when the Coroner's Office won't provide critical information? There are wide-ranging and possible systemic issues involved in Eden's case, and there is concerning lack of NATA accreditation of both Tasmanian Police Forensic Services involving crime scene investigation and mortuary autopsy photos within the hospital and forensic medicine environments in Tasmania. Tasmania is well behind its interstate colleagues when it comes to adopting and following accepted best practices. The Tasmanian Police Manual is about as pathetic as a wet paper bag when it comes to required standards providing information on police powers and criminal investigation procedures. That's probably where you need to start, where you've gone wrong. An independent inquiry without any doubt needs to be established, effective immediately to address the systemic issues, in this case to ensure ethical and best practice investigation and forensic science a less hostile approach by coroners, and the development of much-needed trust and confidence in Tasmanian police and, for God's sake, our coronial system down there. I will have lots more to say over the next week.
Thank you, Senator Lambie. Senator Scarr.
Thank you, Acting Deputy President. I rise to take note of the shocking revelations today of the involvement of the Iranian regime in relation to terrorist acts in Australia, including the firebombing of the Adass Israel Synagogue. And first I'd like to acknowledge the contribution that my dear friend Senator Sharma made and his advocacy in relation to matters involving the Iranian regime and the proposed listing of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a prohibited terrorist organisation over quite a period of time. My thoughts are with Australia's Jewish community at this point. My thoughts are also with those wonderful members of the Iranian diaspora, many of whom came to Australia on humanitarian visas or are still going through processes to have their refugee status resolved, who have been so courageous in standing up publicly against the human rights abuses of the Iranian regime. On a number of occasions in this place, following representations from the wonderful Queensland Iranian community, I've made statements calling for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to be listed as a prohibited terrorist organisation. I did it on 27 March 2024. I did it on 1 July 2024. I did it on 8 October 2024. I did it on 9 October 2024. And I did it on 21 November 2024 in a conference room in Parliament where I met with representatives of the opposition to the Iranian regime in this place. Now, Acting Deputy President, following that meeting on 21 November 2024, when I again put on the record my dismay at the human rights abuses, atrocities being committed in Iran, and I called for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to be listed as a prohibited terrorist organisation for the simple fact that it is a terrorist organisation, I received a letter. And I want to quote from that letter today. 4 December 2024, Senator the Honourable Paul Scarr. And the writer of this letter referred to the parliamentary session I attended on 21 November 2024 and, quote, among other things, there are also some accusations against Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a recognised sovereign armed force. IRGC does have a brilliant record in safeguarding the Islamic Republic of Iran's territorial integrity. And further, the writer of this letter, who happened to be the ambassador of Iran, who was today declared persona non grata and expelled from this country, as he should have been expelled months before, I should say, when he made egregious anti-Semitic slurs on social media. The Islamic Republic of Iran's ambassador said this, quote, I would be more than glad to meet you for a fair and balanced informative discussion on different subjects of your interest on the Islamic Republic of Iran and our bilateral friendly relations with the Commonwealth of Australia. Sincerely yours, Ahmed Sadeghi, Ambassador of the Islamic Republic of Iran in Australia. 2 days later, Deputy President, after the Iranian ambassador wrote me that letter, the Adass Israel Synagogue was firebombed with the direct involvement of the Embassy of Iran. What a disgrace. What an absolute disgrace. And it is fit and proper that he be declared a persona non grata and he be expelled from our country. On 19 August 2025, I was delighted to attend a Multicultural Career and Job Expo in Logan, which I consider to be one of the most successful multicultural cities in the whole of Australia. And I take this opportunity to commend the Mayor, John Raven, and his whole team in relation to the great job they do. And this Multicultural Career and Job Expo was hosted by Multicultural Mailer Inc., which is a wonderful grassroots multicultural organisation. And this was the 4th time in which this event had been held, and there were more than 1,400 job seekers attended this event from a whole raft of multicultural communities. More than 60 potential employers were actually in attendance at the jobs fair, and I have no doubt that many people obtained jobs through this wonderful multicultural jobs fair. I'd like to place on the record my heartfelt thanks to the Executive Committee, Dr Zachariah Amen, Travis Windsor, Peter Hodges, Paul Bailey, Simon Nichols, Matthew Perry. Thank you so much for everything that you did. I'd also like to congratulate the Expo team, Laura Winsell-Carl, who was the Expo coordinator, whose outstanding leadership and commitment were central to the success of the Expo. Also Nazreen Nuruddin, Stephen Gangyu, Nurel El Malyingitiaz, Amber Anjum, Sajid Hossein Neem and Samira Mahmood. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for everything that you did. An amazing event, and it just shows the positive things that happen when grassroots multicultural communities are empowered to help people in the community. So thank you very much for everything you do. On 12 July 2025, Acting Deputy President, I was delighted to attend the St Mary and St Michael Eritrean Orthodox Church for a very successful 9th annual pilgrimage and grand opening of the renovated church and youth culture centre. And this is a congregation that has grown from originally 60 to 400, this congregation of the St Mary and St Michael Eritrean Orthodox Church has been growing at a great rate. And it was a wonderful event. It was truly a wonderful event. And we were blessed with the presence of His Grace Bishop Shinoda. We were also blessed with the presence of the senior faith leaders, the senior reverends of the church, Reverend Gibrabrihan Visaya and Reverend Paul. And I just want to thank all the members of the building committee, in particular of the church, who did an amazing job raising nearly $500,000 to build this church and a youth centre, to renovate the church and add a youth centre, which is doing really important work in the community. So I want to place their names on the record. And Dr. Tukwado Tesfa Mikal, Mr. Kibreb Abraham, Mr. Kibrom Waldai, and Dr. Michael Habti. And thank you so much for everything that you do for the Eritrean community. Our Eritrean community is a great blessing for our beautiful country. On 19 July 2025, I was delighted to attend the opening of the Miskay Hizanan Tigrayan Orthodox Tewahedo Church in Ipswich. Now, we have a wonderful Tigrayan community in Queensland. Many members of that community have been through a great hardship and great ordeal, and the church is so important to their well-being, and they obtain spiritual support and sustenance from the church. And I heard stories when I attended the opening of the church of how important the church is to their lives. And at the church opening, and I should say first, thank you to Father Salam Mariam Tassema and his congregation for inviting me to the event. At the opening of the church, we had His Grace Archbishop Ephraim, the Tigrayan Orthodox Tewahedo Church Archbishop of the Archdiocese of Europe, in attendance. We also had Archbishop Shinoda from the Eritrean Orthodox Tewahedo Church and a number of other special guests. And there are a number of people who were recognised because of their involvement in the Tragrain Church. And I want to place their names on the record here this evening. And Deacon Kimfi Hadgu, Deacon Tesfa Michael Desta and Deacon Tesfalam Bien were all recognised, and they were all given certain titles in recognition of the wonderful contribution they've made to the church. And I would like to again place on the record what a blessing our wonderful Tragrain community is to my home state of Queensland.
Thank you, Senator Scarr. Senator Hanson.
Thank you very much. We are locked in an all or nothing fight for Australia's very soul. On one side are the Australians who built this country, the battlers, the people from the bush, the people who contributed to this country with their hard work and their blood, sweat and tears. The diggers who fought to defend the rights and principles on which this nation was founded. The Australians, now left disenfranchised, as their country has changed for the worse right in front of their eyes. On the other side are the rabid far left, the Marxists, the communists, the socialists, the toxic Labor Party and the hateful Greens. The hypocrites who bring hordes of people here in the middle of an unprecedented housing and rental crisis. The idiots who flood Australia with people who mean us deliberate harm, who despise our values, who laugh at our complacency and who take advantage of our leaders' weakness. Today it's been revealed the hideous Iranian regime actively organised and orchestrated crimes on Australian territory against Australian people. What is absolutely certain in this space is that Iran obviously had fertile ground to plant and grow its hatred in Australia. This is because current immigration policy allows people who nurture these hatreds to come here and to commit these crimes. Labor has given 3,000 people from Gaza permission to come here. That's 3,000 potential agents for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. We should immediately and permanently ban immigration from any countries where this hatred prevails. We cannot afford to take any risks with the safety of the Australian community. Immigration has gotten so out of control that many Australians no longer recognise their own country. This isn't just about housing or jobs. This mass migration is tearing at the fabric of who we are. When I see our flag flying, I see the sacrifice of those who built and defended our nation. It should unite us all, but Labor's agenda is to divide us, to destroy our culture, our identity, and our love for our country. If we lose that unity, we lose Australia itself. This is the true cost of mass immigration, the slow destruction of our nationhood. Labor told us they were going to bring the numbers down. They lied. They've brought about 1.5 million people here since they were elected. Today, Labor is bringing 1,544 people per day. That's more than 560,000 a year. Where are they supposed to live? Where are struggling Australians supposed to live? In the past 3 years, Labor has effectively dumped 1.5 million people into our housing market, onto our health and education systems, our roads, our waters, even adding 12 million tonnes a year to our emissions. Australians are left in the cold while Labor just waves more people through the gate. And make no mistake, this is no accident. It's deliberate, it's intentional. It isn't about a skill shortage or education exports. It's about importing voters and keeping Labor in power. It's about Labor remaking Australia in Labor's perverted image. It's not the politicians and the bureaucrats paying the price. It's ordinary Aussies paying the price. Higher rents, lower wages, homelessness, poverty, and a unique culture envied around the world, being chipped away piece by piece. If you want an end to this crime against Australia, if you want an end to out-of-control immigration, then you stand with One Nation and you stand with me. If you want a safe and united Australia, one people under the Australian flag, you stand with One Nation. We must make sure immigrating to Australia is a privilege to be earned, not an entitlement. Immigrants must have fluent English and definitely no burqas. We must enforce the law and deport the 75,000 people who've breached their visas and the 100,000 failed asylum seekers who were told to go home but haven't. No excuses, no endless appeals, no loopholes. We must cut the numbers drastically. One Nation's policy is to cap immigration to approximately about 130,000 per year, numbers we can actually accommodate. And when we can, then we can look at increasing those numbers over a period of time. We have no problem with immigration that serves the national interest. We acknowledge this is a country built on immigration, and we acknowledge the immigrants who have adopted our values and contributed to our country. We must shut down the rorts and the backdoor channels. We must put Australia back in charge of who comes here. We must withdraw from the UN Refugee Convention, reintroduce temporary protection visas, and refuse entry from nations that foster extremist ideologies incompatible with Australian life. It's basic common sense, it's fairer, and it's what most Australians want. Yet our politicians tend to forget about that, and I think they're living in their own world and don't really understand how Australians are struggling out there with the cost of living. High immigration is the cause for it. And yet they are on about these renewables and to put the, carbon emissions. Why would you bring in so many people into the country if you worry about your carbon emissions and the Paris Agreement that you've signed? If you're bringing over 1,500 people a day into the country, it doesn't make sense. As I said, 12 million tonnes a year you're adding to it. Why would you bring in such numbers when it's affecting the housing, the rental accommodation, services, health, education, nursing homes, roads, infrastructure, everything, you name it, everything. And yet the Australian people are fed up with it. They've had a gutful of it. And yet you keep bringing it in. You have no regard for the Australian people. And to hear you go on about the housing issue in this parliament and say you're going to put up 1.2 million houses, what an absolute joke you are. What an absolute joke. I cannot believe this. And you believe the rubbish that you're telling the Australian people. You actually believe it. I cannot, to listen to the Labor senators and how they get up and espouse all this, it's just an absolute ridiculous joke. And Australians feel they've been stripped of their own identity. They're ashamed, that they're ridiculed by even their own councils if you fly the Australian flag. It's all right to see the Palestinian flag out in these protest rallies and all these other, even Hamas flags, terrorist flags. But, people just feel the point of flying the Australian flag. On Sunday, there is supposed to be this march for Australia. For those Australians out there that do want to go out and have their say and wave the Australian flag, good on you. I congratulate you because you're standing up for the values that you feel have been stripped from you by governments, whether it's this government or previous governments, former governments. You just feel that you're not being listened to. And this country is not the country that I grew up in. I'm ashamed of where we're headed. All this wokeness, the escalating crime, the cost of living, high electricity costs, the decline in our moral values that is happening, all this transgender rubbish and what's going on with women, spaces, it's just absolutely disgusting. And so many of you support it here. Where are your morals and your principles and your values? I can't understand it. that we're supposed to represent the Australian people. The decline that I see in my nation, and I feel sorry for those men and women that have fought and sacrificed their lives to give us the democracy and give us a nation that we should be all so proud of. All I can do is keep fighting for the Australian people to the best I possibly can, to keep raising these issues, bring awareness of what is happening in our country. And I stand by my fellow Australians with pride and dignity and with love for this country. And I will continue to fight for the Australian people to the best of my ability.
The Senate stands adjourned and will meet again tomorrow at 9 a.m.